Hello there, and welcome to Umber Dreams Archives. I'm so glad you found your way here tonight. Before we begin, take a moment to get comfortable, to settle into wherever you are right now. Where in the world are you watching from? A quiet bedroom far from the ocean? A coastal city where you can hear waves in the distance? Wherever you are, you're about to journey to a place more remote than almost anywhere on Earth's surface. Tonight we're going to explore the deepest parts of our ocean. A realm that covers more than 60% of our planet, yet remains more mysterious than the surface of Mars. We'll discover creatures that live in complete darkness, organisms that survive under crushing pressure, and life forms so unusual they challenge everything we thought we knew about biology. It's a journey that descends from the sunlit surface down through layers of increasing darkness, past depths where light itself cannot reach, to places where the ocean floor lies 7 miles below the waves. But don't worry, this isn't going to be a frightening descent into hostile alien waters. Instead, we'll move slowly and carefully through each zone of the ocean, taking our time with each discovery, understanding how these remarkable creatures have adapted to their world. By the end, I think you'll find there's something peaceful about the deep ocean, something almost comforting in its eternal darkness and quiet. If you enjoy these calm explorations, a like and subscribe really helps reach others seeking the same peaceful way to end their day. And to those already subscribed, thank you for being here, for continuing these journeys with me. So settle in. Let your shoulders drop, take a slow breath, and let it out slowly. And let's begin our slow drift down through the ocean's layers, into a world of strange beauty and quiet wonder. There's nowhere you need to be right now, nothing you need to do. Just listen and let the story unfold, like descending through water, slowly, peacefully, into the deep. The ocean isn't simply deep water stretching down uniformly from surface to floor. It's a layered world, a vertical landscape of distinct zones, each with its own character, its own challenges, its own forms of life. Understanding these zones helps us appreciate just how extraordinary deep-sea creatures truly are. The sunlit zone, called the epipelagic, extends from the surface down to about 200 meters. This is where we swim, where sunlight penetrates, where photosynthesis happens and most familiar ocean life resides. The water here is warm, bright, and filled with the kind of creatures we recognize: dolphins and tuna, kelp forests and coral reefs. It's comfortable, accessible, and represents perhaps 5% of the ocean's total volume. But beneath this thin, bright layer, the ocean transforms. The twilight zone, or mesopelagic, stretches from 200 meters down to 1,000. Here, sunlight fades to a dim blue glow, then to near darkness. Temperatures drop. Pressure increases. This is where the ocean begins to reveal its strangeness, where creatures start to look unfamiliar, where bioluminescence becomes common, and eyes grow larger to capture any remaining photons of light filtering down from above. Deeper still lies the midnight zone, the bathypelagic, extending from 1,000 meters to 4,000. Here, sunlight never reaches. The temperature hovers just above freezing. The pressure is immense, hundreds of times greater than at the surface, and yet life persists. Creatures here have evolved in ways that seem almost impossible, adapting to conditions that would instantly crush or freeze surface-dwelling organisms. Below 4,000 meters, we enter the abyssal zone, the abyss, stretching down to 6,000 meters. The word itself evokes emptiness, void, nothingness. But the abyss is not empty. It's home to organisms that live on the ocean floor itself, in the ooze and sediment, in a world of perpetual darkness and cold. And finally, in the deepest trenches, the hadal zone extends from 6,000 meters down to nearly 11,000, to places where the ocean floor has been pushed down by tectonic forces into crevasses deeper than Mount Everest is tall. Each zone represents a progression into more extreme conditions, more intense pressure, colder temperatures, deeper darkness, and yet at each level we find life. Not struggling, barely surviving life, but organisms perfectly adapted to their environment, thriving in conditions we once thought impossible. This progression from light to darkness, from familiar to strange, is the journey we'll take together over the next few hours. We'll descend slowly, zone by zone, meeting the inhabitants of each layer, understanding their adaptations, their beauty, their place in Earth's largest ecosystem. The deep ocean isn't a single environment. It's many worlds stacked vertically, each separated from the next by barriers of pressure and temperature and light. What lives at the bottom cannot survive at the top, and what thrives in sunlight would perish in the abyss. And this vertical isolation has allowed evolution to craft some of the most unusual organisms on Earth, creatures that challenge our understanding of what life can be. And it's this remarkable diversity, this array of adaptations, that leads us to our first encounter with strangeness, to the creatures that live where sunlight begins to fail. For most of human history, the deep ocean remained completely unknown. We could sail across its surface, fish its shallows, even dive down a few meters holding our breath. But the true depths, the midnight zone and beyond, were as inaccessible as outer space. Understanding how we came to explore these regions helps us appreciate the creatures we discovered there. The first serious attempts to reach deep water came in the 1830s, when naturalists began lowering weighted nets from ships, dragging them along the ocean floor and hauling up whatever they caught. These early attempts were crude, often damaging what they captured, giving only glimpses of deep-sea life. But even these glimpses revealed something astonishing. Life existed at depths scientists had thought impossible. The prevailing theory held that nothing could survive below about 600 meters, that the pressure and darkness made life untenable. The nets proved otherwise. In 1872, the British ship HMS Challenger embarked on a 4-year voyage specifically to study the deep ocean. The expedition covered 68,000 nautical miles, took depth soundings, collected water samples, and dredged the ocean floor in hundreds of locations. The Challenger expedition brought up creatures never seen before. Organisms so strange that scientists struggle to classify them. Giant squid beaks, translucent fish, shrimp-like creatures with no eyes at all. The voyage fundamentally changed our understanding of ocean life, revealing that the deep sea wasn't barren but teeming with organisms adapted to its extreme conditions. But nets and dredges could only bring up specimens, dead or dying, often damaged by the rapid pressure change during ascent. To truly understand deep-sea life, humans needed to descend into the depths themselves, to observe these creatures in their natural habitat. This required technology that wouldn't exist until the 20th century. In 1930, 2 explorers, William Beebe and Otis Barton, descended to 435 meters in a steel sphere they called a bathysphere. The sphere was tiny, barely 5 feet in diameter, with thick quartz windows and a cable connecting it to the ship above. Beebe described looking out into the blue-black water, seeing creatures swimming past, bioluminescent lights flickering in the darkness. It was the first time human eyes had witnessed the deep ocean as a living environment rather than a collection of dead specimens in nets. The bathysphere voyages continued through the 1930s, reaching deeper each time, eventually descending to 923 meters in 1934. Beebe's descriptions captured public imagination. The gradual fading of sunlight, the transition from blue to violet to black, the appearance of creatures that glowed with their own light, fish with enormous eyes and fangs, jellies trailing tentacles dozens of feet long. These early explorations were just the beginning. In 1960, the bathyscaphe Trieste, piloted by Jacques Picard and Don Walsh, descended to the deepest known point on Earth, the Challenger, deep in the Mariana Trench, 10,911 meters below the surface. At the bottom, to their astonishment, they saw a flatfish swimming past their viewport. Even at that depth, 7 miles down, Where the pressure exceeded 8 tons per square inch, life existed. Modern exploration uses remotely operated vehicles, ROVs equipped with cameras and lights and collecting arms, that can spend hours in the depths without risk to human life. These robots have revealed ecosystems we never imagined. Hydrothermal vents supporting entire communities of life based on chemistry, rather than sunlight, fields of glass sponges, octopuses brooding eggs for years in the cold water. The history of deep-sea exploration is short, barely a century and a half of serious study. The deep ocean remains less explored than the moon. We've mapped the moon's surface in detail, but less than 20% of the ocean floor has been mapped at similar resolution. Every expedition still discovers new species, sometimes dozens of them. The deep sea keeps its secrets well, revealing them slowly, reluctantly, only to those willing to descend into the darkness. And what these pioneers discovered, what continues to be discovered today, are organisms so perfectly adapted to their extreme environment that they seem almost designed for it. Which brings us to the question of how life survives where it does. Pressure is perhaps the most fundamental challenge of deep-sea life. At the surface, the atmosphere presses down on us at about 14.7 pounds per square inch. We don't notice it because we've evolved to handle it, because our bodies are designed for this pressure. But in the ocean, every 33 feet of depth adds another atmosphere of pressure. At 1,000 meters, the pressure is about 100 times surface pressure. At the bottom of the Mariana Trench, it exceeds 1,000 atmospheres, more than 8 tons per square inch. To understand what this means, imagine holding a small car balanced on your thumbnail. That's roughly the pressure at the deepest parts of the ocean. It would instantly crush most surface organisms. Human bodies, if exposed to such pressure without protection, would be compressed, our lungs collapsed, our cells damaged by the physical force of the water pressing in from all sides. And yet deep-sea creatures thrive in this environment. How? The answer lies in understanding what pressure actually affects. Pressure doesn't crush solid objects or liquids nearly as much as it crushes gases. A rock at the ocean's surface and the same rock at the ocean floor are essentially unchanged. Water is incompressible, so the water in your cells at the surface and water at depth behave the same way. The problem is air spaces, gas-filled cavities, anything with compressible volume. Deep-sea fish have evolved to eliminate air spaces. Most lack swim bladders, the gas-filled organs that help shallow water fish control their buoyancy. Instead, they're neutrally buoyant through other means. Gelatinous tissues that have the same density as water, watery muscles with minimal protein, large amounts of lipids that are lighter than water but incompressible. Some deep-sea fish seem almost fragile, their bodies watery and soft, but this softness is precisely what allows them to survive. They're made of materials that don't compress under pressure. Their bones are thinner, less dense, sometimes barely calcified. Their proteins are structured differently, with amino acid sequences that remain stable under high pressure, where surface organism proteins would denature and unfold. Their cell membranes contain different lipids, polyunsaturated fats that stay flexible in the cold, high-pressure environment. Every aspect of their biochemistry is tuned to function where surface biochemistry would fail. But there's a trade-off. A deep-sea fish brought rapidly to the surface will die, not from the decrease in pressure itself, but from the rapid change. The gases dissolved in its tissues will come out of solution, forming bubbles, essentially giving the fish the bends. The same decompression sickness that affects scuba divers who ascend too quickly. The proteins and membranes that work perfectly at depth may not function properly at surface pressure. The fish is as adapted to the deep as we are to the surface. Unable to survive anywhere else, this specialization means that deep-sea creatures are locked into their zones. A fish from the midnight zone cannot swim up to the twilight zone without physiological damage. The ocean's layers are separated not just by distance, but by pressure barriers that organisms cannot cross. Each zone develops its own fauna, isolated from those above and below, evolving independently in its own unique environment. Pressure also affects other aspects of life. Sound travels faster and farther in deep water, which may be why some deep-sea creatures have well-developed lateral lines, organs that detect vibrations and pressure changes in the water. In complete darkness, sound and pressure waves may be more useful than sight for detecting prey or predators. The deep ocean's pressure creates an environment so different from the surface that creatures there have evolved fundamentally different solutions to the same biological problems. They're not simply altered versions of shallow water fish. They're organisms whose entire biology operates on different principles, whose proteins fold differently, whose cells function under conditions that would destroy ours. Understanding pressure helps us appreciate that these aren't monsters or aberrations. They're perfectly normal organisms adapted to a perfectly normal environment, at least normal for them. The deep ocean isn't hostile to life, it's just hostile to our kind of life. For the creatures born there, evolved there, living there, it's simply home, the only environment their bodies know. And within this high-pressure, dark environment, organisms have developed another remarkable adaptation, one that makes the deep ocean sparkle with living light. In the deep ocean, where sunlight never reaches, darkness should be absolute. And yet the midnight zone and the waters below are filled with light. Not sunlight, not reflected light, but light created by living organisms themselves. Bioluminescence, the production of light through chemical reactions within an organism's body, is one of the most common adaptations in the deep sea. Some estimates suggest that 80 to 90% of deep-sea creatures can produce light in some form. The chemistry of bioluminescence is elegant. It involves a molecule called luciferin, which when combined with oxygen and activated by an enzyme called luciferase, produces light. The reaction is remarkably efficient, generating light with almost no heat, unlike a light bulb which wastes most of its energy as thermal radiation. Bioluminescence is cold light, blue or green usually, wavelengths that travel farthest in water. But what's fascinating is the diversity of how organisms use this ability. Some produce light in photophores, specialized light-producing organs that can be opened or closed like shutters, allowing the creature to control when it glows. Others house bioluminescent bacteria in special chambers, forming a symbiotic relationship. The bacteria get a safe home and nutrients, while the host gets living lanterns. Still others simply secrete luminous clouds when threatened, confusing predators with sudden flashes of light in the darkness. The purposes of bioluminescence are varied and sophisticated. Many creatures use it for camouflage through a strategy called counter-illumination. If you're a fish swimming in the twilight zone where some faint light filters down from above, you cast a shadow below you. Any predator looking up would see your silhouette against the brighter water. To prevent this, many midwater fish have photophores on their undersides that match the intensity of the downwelling light. They glow just bright enough to erase their shadow, becoming invisible to anything looking up. Others use bioluminescence for hunting. The anglerfish, perhaps the most iconic deep-sea creature, dangles a luminous lure in front of its mouth, a modified spine tipped with a glowing bulb filled with bioluminescent bacteria. In the darkness, this light attracts smaller fish, drawn to what might be prey or another fish. When they come close enough, the anglerfish strikes with remarkable speed, its enormous mouth and backward-pointing teeth ensuring that nothing escapes once caught. Some creatures use light for defense, not to hide but to startle or distract. Certain squid, when attacked, squirt clouds of bioluminescent fluid, creating a glowing decoy that hangs in the water while the squid jets away into darkness. The predator, momentarily blinded or confused by the bright cloud, loses track of its prey. And then there's communication. In a world without light, producing your own light allows for signaling. Some species flash in patterns, possibly to identify themselves to potential mates, to coordinate in schools, or to warn others of danger. The patterns can be quite specific, different flash rates or colours indicating different species or different messages. It's a language written in light, in an environment where other forms of communication are limited. What's remarkable is that bioluminescence has evolved independently dozens of times across different lineages. It's not a single trait inherited from a common ancestor, but a solution discovered repeatedly by different organisms facing the same challenge: how to see and be seen in perpetual darkness. Bacteria developed it. Dinoflagellates developed it. Fish, squid, jellyfish, shrimp all found their own biochemical pathways to create light. The colour of bioluminescence matters too. Most is blue-green, wavelengths that travel farthest in water. But some organisms produce red light, which is extremely rare in the deep sea. Red light is quickly absorbed by water, so most deep-sea creatures cannot see it. A creature that produces red light and can see it has an advantage. It can illuminate prey without the prey knowing it's being observed. It's like having a night vision scope in a world where everyone else is blind to that frequency. Bioluminescence transforms the deep ocean from a place of absolute darkness into a realm of tiny scattered lights, a living galaxy of blue-green stars. If you could descend into the midnight zone at night, you'd see occasional flashes, glowing spots, trails of light left by moving creatures. It would be like floating in space surrounded by distant flickering stars, except these stars are alive, each one an organism using light to survive, to hunt, to hide, to communicate. And among all these glowing creatures, some of the most spectacular and unusual forms await our discovery. Organisms whose appearance seems so strange that early scientists struggled to believe they were real. When the first deep-sea specimens were hauled up by nets and dredges in the 19th century, scientists often didn't know what to make of them. The creatures looked wrong somehow, as if evolution had taken a bizarre turn in the depths. But these weren't evolutionary mistakes or monsters. They were elegant solutions to deep-sea survival. One of the earliest strange discoveries was the viperfish, brought up from depths below 500 meters. It's a small fish, rarely longer than a foot, but its appearance is striking. The mouth extends almost as far back as its gills, filled with teeth so long they cannot fit entirely inside the mouth. When the viperfish closes its jaws, the fangs curve up and back, some reaching almost to the fish's eyes. It looks ferocious, and in a way it is, an efficient predator in an environment where food is scarce. But look closer, and the design makes sense. In the deep sea, prey is infrequent. When a viperfish encounters potential food, it cannot afford to miss. The enormous mouth and long teeth create a trap that's hard to escape. The teeth point backward, ensuring that anything caught cannot swim forward out of the mouth. The viperfish doesn't need to bite hard or chew, it simply needs to engulf and hold, and its stomach can expand to accommodate prey nearly as large as itself, allowing it to take advantage of any meal opportunity, however infrequent. Then there was the hatchet fish, a small, laterally compressed fish that looks like its name suggests, a hatchet blade, or perhaps a silver dollar stood on edge. Its body is deep vertically but incredibly thin side to side, an adaptation that may reduce its silhouette when viewed from the side while presenting a minimal target from below. Its eyes are tubular, pointing upward, watching for the shadows of prey or predators above. And its underside is covered with photophores, creating counter-illumination, making it invisible to anything looking up. Scientists also discovered the gulper eel, a creature so unusual it required its own taxonomic family. It has an enormous mouth, far larger than its body would suggest, attached to a long whip-like tail. The mouth can unhinge and expand to an extraordinary degree, allowing the eel to swallow prey much larger than itself. It drifts through the water, mouth open, essentially a living net, waiting for something to swim into it. The tail is tipped with a photophore, a glowing lure that may attract prey toward the mouth or may serve some other purpose we haven't yet understood. These early discoveries challenged assumptions about fish morphology, about what bodies could look like and still function. Surface fish have consistent proportions, limited by the need to swim efficiently in sunlit waters where predators are common and prey can see them coming. But in the deep, where encounters are rare and darkness hides approach, bodies can take more extreme forms. Mouths can be enormous, teeth can be grotesque, bodies can be barely substantial, all without the disadvantages these traits would carry in shallower water. What struck early naturalists wasn't just how different these creatures looked, but how many species there were. Each new dredging expedition brought up organisms never seen before. The diversity suggested that the deep sea, far from being barren, hosted complex ecosystems with numerous niches, specialized predators and prey, intricate food webs operating entirely in darkness. Some scientists initially thought these creatures must be primitive, ancient forms that had retreated to the depths when more advanced species took over shallow waters. But this interpretation was wrong. Deep-sea creatures aren't primitive, they're highly specialized. Their unusual features the result of millions of years of evolution fine-tuning them for their specific environment. The viperfish's teeth, the hatchetfish's counter-illumination, the gulper eel's expandable mouth, all are sophisticated adaptations, not primitive holdovers. The realization gradually dawned that the deep ocean was not an afterthought in Earth biology, but a major ecosystem in its own right, containing perhaps more living space than all terrestrial environments combined. The water column from the surface down to the floor provides vastly more habitable volume than land surfaces offer. And in that volume, evolution has been working just as actively as it has on land or in shallow seas, producing creatures just as specialized, just as successful, just as well adapted to their world. These first strange encounters were only the beginning. As exploration techniques improved, as cameras and submersibles allowed observation of living deep-sea creatures in their natural habitat, rather than as damaged specimens in nets, scientists discovered that strangeness was the norm in the deep, not the exception. What seemed bizarre from a surface perspective was perfectly ordinary in the abyss. And among all these strange discoveries, few captured imagination quite like the creature we'll meet next, an animal that haunted sailors' nightmares for centuries before science proved it real. For hundreds of years, sailors told stories of enormous tentacled monsters that rose from the depths to drag ships beneath the waves. The Kraken, they called it in Norse mythology, or sea monsters in other traditions. These stories were dismissed as superstition, exaggeration, the fevered imagination of men too long at sea, and then, in the 1850s, pieces of enormous squid began washing ashore in Denmark, proof that something very large with tentacles did exist in the ocean. The giant squid, Architeuthis dux, is a creature of the twilight zone, living primarily between 300 and 600 meters depth. Adults can reach lengths of 13 meters or more, with the two feeding tentacles extending several meters beyond the arms. The eyes are enormous, the largest in the animal kingdom, sometimes exceeding 11 inches in diameter. These eyes aren't just large for the squid's body size, they're large in absolute terms, bigger than dinner plates, capable of detecting extremely faint light. For over a century, we knew giant squid only from dead specimens washed ashore or found in the stomachs of sperm whales, which hunt them in the deep. No one had seen a living giant squid in its natural habitat. All our knowledge came from carcasses, often damaged. Sometimes just fragments. Scientists could describe anatomy but could only guess at behavior. Did they hunt actively or ambush prey? Did they live alone or in groups? How did they move through the water column? In 2004, Japanese researchers succeeded in photographing a live giant squid in the wild for the first time, at a depth of 900 meters. The photo showed an active, powerful predator, not the sluggish creature some had imagined. The squid was attacking bait. Its tentacles extending with remarkable precision, the hooks on its suckers embedding in the target. 3 years later, the same team captured video footage of a living giant squid at depth, revealing how it moved, how it hunted, What emerges from these observations is a picture of a sophisticated predator perfectly adapted to the twilight zone. The giant eyes can detect the bioluminescent flashes of prey, or the faint silhouettes of animals passing above against the dim light from the surface. The tentacles can strike with impressive speed and force. The squid's body is muscular and powerful, capable of jet propulsion for bursts of speed or hovering nearly motionless in the water. But the giant squid isn't even the largest squid in the ocean. That title belongs to the colossal squid, Mesonychoteuthis hamiltoni, which lives in the Southern Ocean at depths exceeding 1,000 meters. Colossal squid can weigh up to 700 kilograms, far heavier than giant squid, with shorter but thicker arms and tentacles equipped with rotating hooks in addition to suckers. Only a handful of colossal squid specimens have ever been recovered. Most from the stomachs of sperm whales. We've never photographed one alive. These enormous cephalopods raise fascinating questions about deep-sea food webs. What do they eat to grow so large? The answer seems to be fish and smaller squid, which they catch with their tentacles. But that just pushes the question deeper. What do those fish and squid eat? The reality is that the deep ocean, despite appearing barren, supports surprising biomass. Much of the food comes from above, from what's called marine snow, a constant gentle rain of organic particles drifting down from the surface, dead plankton, fecal matter, fragments of larger organisms, all settling slowly through the water column. This marine snow feeds small organisms on the seafloor and in the water column, which are eaten by larger creatures, which are eaten by larger ones still, creating food chains that ultimately support even giant squid. It's a more diffuse ecosystem than surface waters, spread across vast vertical distances, but it functions, cycling energy from sunlit regions down into the abyss. Giant and colossal squid also face predators. Sperm whales dive to over 1,000 meters specifically to hunt large squid. The battles between whale and squid must be remarkable. Deep underwater in near darkness, the whale using echolocation to track its prey, the squid trying to escape or fight back. Many sperm whales bear circular scars from squid suckers on their skin, evidence of these encounters. What's perhaps most striking about giant squid is how recently we've come to know them. Creatures up to 13 meters long living in Earth's oceans remained photographed alive in their habitat only 20 years ago. The ocean hides even enormous organisms well. If something as large as a giant squid could remain essentially unknown until the 21st century, what else might be down there, swimming in zones we've barely explored? The giant squid reminds us that the ocean keeps secrets, that mystery still exists on our planet, that there are creatures and ecosystems we've only begun to understand. And it reminds us that what sailors called monsters were real organisms, not supernatural but natural, extraordinary but not impossible, alive and thriving in the dim blue twilight of the ocean's middle depths. From these largest of invertebrates, let's turn our attention to creatures that carry their own light into the darkness, fish that embody perhaps the most iconic image of deep-sea life. At first glance, a gulper eel doesn't look like a coherent organism. It seems to be mostly mouth, an enormous gaping maw attached to a thin whip-like body that trails behind for up to 6 feet. The mouth can unhinge and expand to several times the size of the eel's head, creating a capacious trap for prey. It's one of the most extreme feeding adaptations in the deep sea, and it raises the question, how does such a design work? The gulper eel, also called the pelican eel because its mouth resembles a pelican's bill pouch, lives at depths between 500 and 3,000 meters in the lower twilight zone and the midnight zone. It belongs to a family of eels, saccharopharyngiforms, that have evolved highly modified anatomy for deep-sea life. Unlike most fish, gulper eels have no scales, no swim bladder, no ribs. The skeleton is reduced to flexible cartilage. The entire body is designed for one thing: creating a very large mouth attached to a very extendable stomach. The jaw mechanism is extraordinary. Most fish jaws are relatively rigid, opening to a fixed maximum angle. but the gulper eel's jaws are connected by elastic tissue that allows them to unhinge completely, spreading wide enough to engulf prey much larger than the eel's normal head width. The lower jaw can swing down almost 90 degrees, and the mouth cavity can balloon outward, creating a volume far exceeding what the eel's thin body would suggest possible. How does the eel use this enormous mouth? There are two theories, and both might be correct for different situations. One theory suggests that the eel simply drifts through the water with its mouth open, essentially trawling for prey. Anything that swims or drifts into the mouth is trapped, the jaws close, and the prey is swallowed. This would be a passive feeding strategy, requiring minimal energy, appropriate for an environment where food is scarce, and active hunting might use more energy than it yields. The other theory proposes more active hunting. The eel might swim toward prey and then suddenly expand its mouth, creating a rush of water into the mouth cavity that pulls the prey in along with it. It's similar to suction feeding in other fish, but on a much larger scale. The massive expansion of the mouth would create significant negative pressure, drawing in water and anything suspended in it. The eel's stomach matches its mouth in flexibility. It can expand dramatically to hold large prey items, and it's thought that gulper eels might eat very infrequently, perhaps going weeks or months between meals. When they do successfully capture something, they maximize the benefit by being able to swallow it whole regardless of size, then slowly digest it over an extended period. At the tip of the gulper eel's tail is a photophore, a bioluminescent organ that glows pink or red. The function of this light isn't entirely clear. It might serve as a lure, attracting prey toward the tail while the mouth waits nearby to ambush them, or it might help the eel navigate or communicate with potential mates. Red bioluminescence is rare in the deep sea, and most deep-sea creatures cannot see red light, which could give the eel an advantage in either hunting or avoiding predators. What's striking about gulper eels is how they represent an extreme point in fish morphology. Evolution has taken the basic fish body plan and modified it almost beyond recognition, creating something that barely resembles a conventional fish. The result looks strange, almost comical, until you understand it as an adaptation to a specific ecological niche. A slow-moving or stationary predator in an environment where prey is scarce and distributed unpredictably through a vast volume of water. In such an environment, the ability to capture and consume any prey item you encounter, regardless of size, is valuable. A fish with a fixed gape size might encounter prey too large to eat and have to pass up the opportunity. The gulper eel, with its expandable mouth and stomach, can take advantage of almost any edible organism it meets. This flexibility could mean the difference between survival and starvation in the food-poor depths. Gulper eels also have very small eyes, suggesting that vision is not their primary sense. They likely rely more on detecting vibrations and pressure changes in the water, using their lateral line system to sense nearby movement. In complete darkness, eyes are less useful than other senses, and natural selection tends to reduce structures that are energetically expensive to maintain if they don't provide significant benefit. The gulper eel reminds us that adaptation isn't always about adding complexity. Sometimes it's about simplifying, reducing, focusing on one specialized strategy, and optimizing everything around it. The eel has reduced its skeleton, its musculature, its sensory systems, all in service of maximizing the effectiveness of its single strategy, being a very large, very efficient mouth waiting in the darkness. And yet, for all its unusual appearance, the gulper eel is not unsuccessful. It's found throughout the world's deep oceans, suggesting that its peculiar design works well for its environment. What looks strange to us is normal for the depths, where different rules apply and different solutions succeed. From these extreme jaws, we turn to a creature whose name suggests menace, but whose actual behavior is far gentler than its appearance would indicate. When scientists first discovered Vampiroteuthis infernalis in 1899, its appearance suggested something sinister. The the species name means underscore, quote, underscore 0 underscore, and it does look rather dramatic. Dark, reddish-black in colour, with webbing between its 8 arms creating a cloak-like appearance, photophores dotting its body, and eyes that are proportionally the largest of any animal, making up much of its small body. But despite its ominous name, the vampire squid is not a voracious predator. In fact, it's one of the most gentle creatures in the deep sea. Feeding not on living prey but on marine snow, the organic detritus that drifts down from surface waters, it's a scavenger, not a hunter, surviving on particles of dead plankton, fecal matter, and fragments of larger organisms that most deep-sea predators ignore. The vampire squid lives at depths between 600 and 900 meters in what's called the oxygen minimum zone. This is a region of the ocean where oxygen levels drop to extremely low concentrations, often too low for most fish to survive. The vampire squid has adapted to this environment through several specialized features. It has a very low metabolic rate, requiring minimal oxygen. Its gills are highly efficient, extracting oxygen from water where other organisms would suffocate, and it moves slowly, conserving energy, drifting through the water rather than swimming actively. When threatened, the vampire squid doesn't attack or flee rapidly like other cephalopods. Instead, it turns itself inside out, pulling its webbed arms up and over its body, transforming into a ball-like shape with its photophores facing outward. The photophores can flash in patterns, creating light displays that might confuse or deter predators. It also has small, fleshy chirae, thread-like projections that dangle from the webbing and may serve as sensory organs or possibly as additional visual distractions. If the predator persists, the vampire squid has another defense. It can eject a cloud of sticky bioluminescent mucus rather than ink. This cloud hangs in the water, glowing, potentially sticking to the predator and making it visible to its own predators. It's a clever strategy in an environment where invisibility is survival. But most of the time, the vampire squid simply drifts collecting food. It has 2 retractile filaments, thin strands that can extend to twice the squid's body length. These filaments are covered in tiny hair-like structures that trap marine snow as it falls through the water. Periodically, the squid retracts the filaments and draws them through its arms, scraping off the collected particles and guiding them to its mouth. It's a slow, patient feeding strategy, accumulating tiny bits of nutrition from the constant rain of organic matter. This feeding method is rare among cephalopods, most of which are active predators. The vampire squid represents an evolutionary divergence, a cephalopod that evolved to exploit a food source most others ignore. In doing so, it carved out a niche in the oxygen minimum zone, a region that larger, more active predators cannot tolerate. The vampire squid's eyes, while proportionally enormous, are adapted for detecting bioluminescence rather than forming sharp images. In the darkness of the oxygen minimum zone, the primary visual information comes from the flashes and glows of other organisms. The large eyes can detect even faint light, allowing the squid to sense nearby predators, or possibly other vampire squid. Despite being studied for over a century, much about vampire squid biology remains mysterious. We don't know their full life cycle, how long they live, how they reproduce, or how many exist in the world's oceans. They're difficult to keep alive in captivity, and equally difficult to study in their natural habitat. The few observations we have come from specimens caught in nets, or occasional footage from deep-sea submersibles. What we do know is that the vampire squid represents yet another variation on deep-sea survival. It's not powerful or fast or armed with fearsome weapons. Instead, it's adapted to survive where others cannot, in low-oxygen water, feeding on resources most creatures ignore, defending itself with light and deception rather than force. It's a specialist, filling a specific ecological role that no other cephalopod occupies. The name quote 1 now seems almost ironic. This creature is not hellish, but remarkably gentle. Not a vampire, but a scavenger. Not fearsome, but fragile. It's a reminder that first impressions, especially of deep-sea creatures, are often misleading. What appears sinister is often simply strange, and strangeness is just unfamiliarity with a different way of surviving in a different world. And speaking of different ways of seeing, our next creature has perhaps the most unusual eyes in the ocean, organs that seem to defy the basic principles of how eyes should be structured. Imagine a fish whose eyes are fixed in place, pointing straight upward, unable to move to look forward or to the side. Now imagine that these eyes are not on the surface of the head but inside it, protected by a transparent dome that covers the top of the skull. This is Macropina microstoma, the barrel-eye fish, and it has one of the most extraordinary visual systems in the ocean. The barrel-eye was first discovered in the 1939, but for decades scientists misunderstood its anatomy. Specimens brought up in nets arrived damaged, the delicate transparent dome destroyed by the pressure change or the violence of capture. What remained looked like a fish with tiny eyes near its snout and a damaged head. It wasn't until 2004 when researchers from the Monterey Bay Aquarium Research Institute captured video of a living barrel-eye at depth that the full structure became clear. This ability to rotate the eyes while keeping them protected within a transparent shield is unique among fish. It represents a sophisticated solution to the problem of feeding in the twilight zone, where looking up to spot prey and looking forward to catch it require different eye orientations. Most fish solve this with mobile eyes on the outside of the head. The barrel-eye solved it with internal rotatable eyes within a protective dome. The eyes themselves are highly specialized. The tubular shape allows for large lenses relative to body size, gathering maximum light. The retinas are packed with rod cells. The photoreceptors specialize for low-light vision. There are minimal cone cells, meaning the barrel-eye likely sees in black and white or minimal color, but with extraordinary sensitivity to faint light. In the dim blue twilight of its habitat, this is more valuable than color vision. The barrel-eye's body is small, rarely exceeding 6 inches in length, and mostly transparent itself. The dark pigmentation is primarily in the eyes and some internal organs. Being translucent helps with camouflage, making the fish harder to see from below. Predators looking up would see only the eyes and perhaps a faint shimmer, easy to miss in the already dim water. What's remarkable is how recently we've understood this fish's true anatomy. The barrel-eye isn't rare, it's reasonably common in its habitat, but its delicate structure meant that every specimen brought to the surface was damaged, hiding its most unusual features. Only with the advent of deep-sea submersibles and high-quality video cameras could scientists observe it living naturally, behaving normally. Its transparent dome intact and functional. The barrel-eye reminds us how much we still don't know about deep-sea life. A fish can be discovered, named, and studied for 65 years before we understand how its eyes actually work. And if something as visible as eye structure can remain mysterious for decades, how much else about deep-sea organisms have we misunderstood or not yet discovered? As we move deeper into the ocean, past the twilight zone's faint glimmers of surface light, and into the perpetual darkness of the midnight zone, the creatures we encounter become even more specialized, even more adapted to a world that seems, from our perspective, increasingly alien. And yet, in the midnight zone and below, we find not emptiness but thriving communities, ecosystems based on entirely different principles than those of the sunlit world above. In 1977, scientists exploring the Galapagos Rift, a volcanic region on the Pacific Ocean floor at 2,500 meters depth, discovered something that fundamentally changed our understanding of life on Earth. They found underwater hot springs, hydrothermal vents, billowing clouds of mineral-rich water heated to hundreds of degrees Celsius. And clustered around these vents, thriving in what should have been a lifeless environment, were dense communities of organisms unlike anything seen before. Hydrothermal vents form at mid-ocean ridges, the underwater mountain ranges where tectonic plates pull apart and magma rises from Earth's mantle. Seawater seeps into cracks in the ocean floor where it's heated by the magma below, dissolving minerals from the rocks. This superheated, mineral-rich water then erupts back into the ocean through vents, creating chimney-like structures that can tower several stories high. The water emerging from these vents can exceed 400 degrees Celsius, hot enough to melt lead. But the immense pressure at depth prevents it from boiling. Instead, it mixes with the near-freezing ocean water, creating temperature gradients where water can go from 400 degrees to 4 degrees across just a few meters. It's one of the most extreme environments on Earth, combining crushing pressure, toxic minerals, zero light, and wild temperature swings. And yet, life not only exists here but flourishes. The discovery of vent communities revealed that life doesn't necessarily require sunlight. All food webs we knew about were ultimately based on photosynthesis, on plants or algae capturing light energy to create organic compounds. But at hydrothermal vents, there's no light. The ecosystems there are based on chemosynthesis, on bacteria that can extract energy from chemicals in the vent water, particularly hydrogen sulfide, which is toxic to most life. These chemosynthetic bacteria form the base of the food chain, just as photosynthetic organisms do in sunlit ecosystems. Other organisms eat the bacteria or form symbiotic relationships with them, hosting bacteria in their tissues and deriving nutrition from the compounds the bacteria produce. It's a completely separate foundation for life, independent of the sun, powered instead by Earth's internal heat. The discovery of hydrothermal vents transformed oceanography and biology. It revealed that the deep seafloor wasn't uniformly lifeless and quiet, but contained oases of extraordinary biological productivity. It demonstrated that life's requirements are more flexible than we thought, that what we considered necessary, sunlight, isn't always essential. And it opened up entirely new fields of research into extremophile organisms, life at temperature and chemical extremes. These vents also provide a window into early Earth. The conditions around hydrothermal vents. Hot water rich in minerals and chemicals reacting with seawater may be similar to conditions on early Earth when life first emerged. Some scientists theorize that life itself may have begun at hydrothermal vents, in the chemical-rich interface between hot vent water and cold ocean, where energy and raw materials were abundant. And the creatures that live around these vents, the organisms we'll meet in the next sections, are among the most unusual on Earth. Perfectly adapted to an environment that seems impossibly extreme. Among the most striking organisms at hydrothermal vents are giant tube worms, Riftia pachyptila, which can grow over 2 meters long. They cluster around vents in dense stands, their bright red plumes waving in the current, looking almost like flowers in a garden. Except this garden is on the ocean floor 2,000 meters down, in complete darkness, bathed in toxic water. The tube worm's red plume is a gill structure, specialized for absorbing oxygen, carbon dioxide, and hydrogen sulfide from the water. The worm lives inside a white chitinous tube that it secretes, never leaving, fixed in place for its entire life. It has no mouth, no digestive system, no anus. It cannot eat in any conventional sense, and yet it grows rapidly. Among the fastest growing invertebrates known, how does an organism without a digestive system obtain nutrition? The answer lies in symbiosis. Inside the tube worm's body is an organ called the trophosome, which constitutes much of its body mass. The trophosome is packed with chemosynthetic bacteria, billions of them, living in the worm's tissues. These bacteria take the hydrogen sulfide, oxygen and carbon dioxide that the worm's plume absorbs from the water and use these chemicals to produce organic compounds through chemosynthesis. The relationship is mutualistic. The bacteria get a stable environment, protection from the ocean, and a steady supply of the chemicals they need. The worm gets the organic compounds the bacteria produce, which it absorbs directly into its tissues. It's a partnership so integrated that neither organism can survive without the other. The worm provides the housing and chemical delivery system. The bacteria provide all nutrition. What makes this even more remarkable is that tube worms don't inherit their bacteria. When tube worm larvae first settle onto the seafloor near a vent, they have no bacteria inside them. They must acquire bacteria from the environment, absorbing them through temporary mouth structures that exist only in juveniles. Once the bacteria colonize the developing trophosome, the mouth seals shut and the digestive tract degenerates, leaving an adult worm completely dependent on its bacterial partners. The bacteria themselves are specialists. They belong to a group called chemoautotrophs, organisms that can build all the complex molecules of life starting from simple inorganic chemicals and energy from chemical reactions. They're essentially doing what plants do, building sugars and other compounds, but using chemical energy instead of light energy. The process is called chemosynthesis, and it's just as effective as photosynthesis for supporting life, given the right chemical inputs. The tube worm's blood is specialized to transport hydrogen sulfide without being poisoned by it. Hydrogen sulfide is toxic to most organisms because it interferes with cellular respiration. But tube worms have special hemoglobin that can bind hydrogen sulfide and transport it safely to the trophosome, where the bacteria use it. The hemoglobin also carries oxygen, which is needed both by the worm's tissues and by the bacteria. It's an elegant solution, a single molecule handling both a necessary resource and a dangerous toxin. The discovery of giant tube worms challenged fundamental assumptions about animal life. An animal with no digestive system seemed impossible. An ecosystem not based on photosynthesis seemed equally impossible. And yet here they were, thriving in one of Earth's harshest environments, demonstrating that life is more versatile, more inventive, more adaptable than we imagined. Tube worms are just one example of vent organisms that depend on chemosynthetic symbiosis. There are others, each with its own variation on the partnership between animal and bacteria, each filling a different niche in the vent ecosystem. And among these other organisms, few are more unusual or more recent discoveries than the creature we'll meet next. In 2005, marine biologists exploring hydrothermal vents in the South Pacific discovered a creature so unusual it required the creation of a new taxonomic family. They called it the Yeti crab, Kiwa hirsuta, after the mythical Himalayan creature, because the crab's claws and legs were covered in dense mats of blonde, fur-like setae, tiny hair-like bristles that gave it a shaggy appearance unlike any other crab. The Yeti crab lives close to hydrothermal vents, but not right in the hottest water like tube worms. Instead, it positions itself in the zone where vent water mixes with cold ocean water in the temperature and chemical gradients. And the fur on its claws and legs isn't decorative, it's functional, serving as a garden for chemosynthetic bacteria. The Yeti crab farms bacteria on its own body. The setae provide massive surface area for bacteria to colonize, and the crab actively waves its claws through the chemical-rich water near vents, apparently feeding the bacteria with the sulfides and other compounds they need. The crab then harvests these bacteria, scraping them off with specialized mouthparts and consuming them. It's both farmer and field, cultivating its food source on its own appendages. This behavior, waving the claws rhythmically near vents, has been observed in video footage from submersibles. The crabs cluster around vents, sometimes in large numbers, all performing the same slow, synchronized movements, waving their furry claws through the mineral-laden water. It's an eerie sight, these pale crustaceans dancing in the darkness at the bottom of the ocean. The Yeti crab's dependence on the bacteria means it cannot stray far from vents. It needs the chemical input to keep its bacterial partners alive, but it also cannot get too close. The water immediately emerging from vents would be lethally hot. So it lives in a narrow zone, the Goldilocks region where chemistry and temperature are just right for bacterial cultivation. Since the first discovery, additional species of Yeti crabs have been found at other vent sites, in the Antarctic and elsewhere. Each species has its own variations, different amounts of setae, different behaviours, adaptations to the specific conditions at their particular vents. It's become clear that Yeti crabs are a successful evolutionary lineage, having radiated into multiple species across different ocean basins. What's particularly interesting is how recently these crabs were discovered. Hydrothermal vents themselves were unknown until 1977. Yeti crabs weren't discovered until 2005, over a quarter century later. Despite numerous vent explorations in the intervening decades, this entire family of organisms remained unknown. It suggests that even in environments we've explored, we're still finding major new groups of organisms. The vent ecosystems that Yeti crabs inhabit are surprisingly diverse. Beyond tube worms and Yeti crabs, there are vent mussels and clams, also hosting chemosynthetic bacteria in their gills. There are unusual fish, eelpouts and vent fish that feed on the invertebrates. There are amphipods, polychaete worms, and various other crustaceans. Each species has its own strategy for exploiting the resources the vents provide. Some organisms, like the Pompeii worm, live directly on vent chimneys in water that fluctuates between 20 and 80 degrees Celsius, perhaps the hottest environment any complex organism can tolerate. The worm secretes a mucus coating that may insulate it from temperature extremes and host bacteria on its back that possibly help with thermal regulation or nutrition. Others are more mobile, scavenging around vents, feeding on the organic matter produced by the chemosynthetic communities. Octopuses have been observed near vents, though they don't seem to depend on chemosynthesis themselves. They're likely attracted by the abundance of prey, the crustaceans and tube worms and other invertebrates that cluster around the heat and chemistry. The community structure around vents shows typical ecological patterns: primary producers, the bacteria; primary consumers, organisms like tube worms and Yeti crabs that depend on bacteria; secondary consumers, predators that eat the primary consumers. It's a complete ecosystem, just based on a different energy source than we're used to. Temperature and chemical gradients create microhabitats at different distances from the vent. Close in, only the most heat-tolerant species survive. Farther out, where water is cooler but still chemically enriched, different species dominate. Still farther away, the community transitions to typical deep-sea fauna that don't depend on vent chemistry at all. It's a gradation, a spectrum of life adapting to a spectrum of conditions. Studying vent communities helps us understand how ecosystems function at a fundamental level. What makes a community stable or unstable? How do species interactions shape community composition? How does energy flow through systems when the energy source is chemical rather than photosynthetic? Vents are natural laboratories for ecology, isolated ecosystems where we can observe principles that apply more broadly. And they're beautiful in a stark, alien way. The billowing smoke, the towering chimneys, the clustered tube worms and waving Yeti crabs, the shimmering heat gradients visible in submersible lights, all create landscapes unlike anything on the surface. They're reminders that Earth still contains frontiers, still harbours environments we're only beginning to explore and understand. From the heat and chemistry of vents, we turn to other remarkable deep-sea creatures. Organisms that have nothing to do with hydrothermal systems but are equally fascinating in their adaptations to life in the abyss. Octopuses are generally associated with shallow tropical waters, coral reefs, rocky coastlines where they can hide in crevices and hunt crabs and fish. But octopuses have also colonized the deep sea, evolving adaptations for life in darkness and cold, creating species that look and behave quite differently from their shallow water relatives. Perhaps the most charming of deep-sea octopuses is the Dumbo octopus, genus Grimperteuthis, named for the ear-like fins that extend from the sides of its head, making it resemble the flying elephant from the Disney film. These fins allow the octopus to swim through the water by flapping them, an unusual mode of locomotion for octopuses, which typically crawl or use jet propulsion. Dumbo octopuses live at depths between 3,000 and 4,000 meters in the abyssal zone. They're small, rarely exceeding 8 inches in length, with soft, gelatinous bodies adapted to the high pressure. They drift above the seafloor, feeding on small invertebrates, worms and crustaceans that live in the sediment. When they find suitable substrate, they descend and probe the mud with their arms, searching for prey. What's striking about Dumbo octopuses is how different they are from shallow water octopuses. They lack the defensive ink sac. In total darkness, ink would be useless. They have reduced chromatophores, the pigment cells that allow shallow octopuses to change colour for camouflage and communication. In the abyss, where there's no light to reflect, colour-changing ability provides little advantage. They move more slowly, conserving energy in an environment where food is less abundant. But they retain the octopus intelligence. All octopuses have complex nervous systems, with neurons distributed throughout their arms as well as concentrated in their brains. They're capable of learning, problem-solving, using tools. Whether deep-sea octopuses have the same cognitive abilities as shallow water species is difficult to determine. We have limited opportunities to observe their behaviour in natural settings, and even fewer opportunities to study them in controlled experiments. Other deep-sea octopuses include the telescope octopus, which has unusual tubular eyes somewhat similar to the barrel-eye fish, possibly adapted for detecting bioluminescence. Some deep-sea octopuses are very large. The giant Pacific octopus can occasionally be found at moderate depths, and there are reports, though unverified, of larger deep-sea species. One of the most remarkable deep-sea octopuses was observed in 2007 by a remotely operated vehicle exploring a canyon at 1,400 meters depth. The researchers found a female octopus brooding eggs, sitting over them, protecting them. This might not seem unusual, except that when the researchers returned to the same site multiple times over the next 4.5 years, the same octopus was still there, still brooding the same batch of eggs. 53 months. That's how long this octopus sat with her eggs, the longest known brooding period for any animal. During that entire time, she didn't appear to feed. There was no evidence of food remains nearby, and she never left the eggs. She was slowly starving, her body wasting away, entirely devoted to giving her offspring the best chance of survival. Why would such a long brooding period evolve? In the deep sea, cold temperatures slow development. The eggs take far longer to hatch than they would in warm, shallow water. But cold water also has more dissolved oxygen, which the developing embryos need. The mother's job is to keep the eggs clean, to wave fresh, oxygenated water over them to protect them from scavengers. For 4.5 years, this octopus performed this task, likely dying shortly after her eggs hatched. This observation reveals something profound about deep-sea life. Reproduction is difficult and investment in offspring is high. In an environment where food is scarce and conditions are harsh, producing offspring that survive to adulthood requires enormous parental effort. A brooding period of 4.5 years represents one extreme of the spectrum, but many deep-sea organisms have long generation times, late maturation, and high parental investment. The intelligence of octopuses, combined with their adaptability, has allowed them to colonize almost every marine environment, from tide pools to the abyss. Each habitat has its own species, its own variations on the basic octopus body plan. Deep-sea octopuses are generally smaller, slower, more gelatinous than shallow water species, but they retain the sophisticated nervous system, the problem-solving ability, the behavioural flexibility that characterises all octopuses. What goes on in the mind of a Dumbo octopus as it drifts through the abyssal darkness? Does it experience its environment the way we do, with sensations and perhaps emotions? Or is its consciousness, if it has anything we'd recognise as consciousness, fundamentally different, shaped by a nervous system distributed across 8 arms, and by a life lived in eternal night? These questions are difficult even to frame properly. We understand so little about consciousness in any organism, let alone in cephalopods, let alone in deep-sea cephalopods that we can rarely observe. But the questions themselves are worth contemplating. Reminders that intelligence and complexity aren't limited to vertebrates or to sunlit environments, and from the abyssal plains where Dumbo octopuses hunt, we descend even deeper, to the most extreme environment in the ocean, the deepest place on Earth. If you took Mount Everest, the tallest mountain on Earth, and placed it in the Mariana Trench, the deepest part of the ocean, its peak would still be over a mile underwater. The Challenger. Deep, the lowest known point in the Mariana Trench, reaches a depth of 10,994 metres, nearly 11 kilometres, almost 7 miles below the ocean surface. The pressure there exceeds 1,090 atmospheres, more than 16,000 pounds per square inch, roughly 8 tons pressing on every square inch. The trench itself is a crescent-shaped scar in the Pacific Ocean floor, over 1,500 miles long, formed where the Pacific tectonic plate is being subducted beneath the smaller Mariana plate. The collision of these plates creates the trench, a deep wound in Earth's crust that has become the deepest accessible point on the planet. For most of human history, the trench's depth was unknown. Early soundings with weighted lines couldn't reach bottom. It wasn't until the 20th century, with the development of echo sounding, that the true depth began to be understood. And it wasn't until 1960 that humans first visited the deepest point, when Jacques Picard and Don Walsh descended in the bathyscaphe Trieste. Their descent took nearly 5 hours, slowly sinking through darkness, through zones of increasing pressure, until they touched bottom at the Challenger Deep. They spent only 20 minutes there. The pressure was extreme, and they had limited life support. But in those 20 minutes, they observed the ocean floor through their viewport, saw sediment, saw shrimp-like amphipods swimming past, and most significantly, saw a flatfish, a bottom-dwelling fish living in the deepest water on Earth. That single observation changed scientific understanding. If fish could survive at the absolute limit of ocean depth, then life could potentially exist anywhere in the ocean. There was no depth where life was impossible, only depths where it became increasingly rare and specialized. Since 1960, only a handful of people have descended to Challenger Deep. James Cameron made the dive in 2012 in a specially designed submersible, spending several hours on the bottom, filming and collecting samples. More recently, Victor Vescovo made multiple dives in 2019, bringing up new species of amphipods and confirming that life at the deepest point is more diverse than previously thought. The organisms that live in the hadal zone, the deepest parts of ocean trenches, are called hadal fauna, named after Hades, the underworld of Greek mythology. They're mostly invertebrates, amphipods, isopods, sea cucumbers, and polychaete worms. Fish are rare but present, including snailfish that have been found at depths exceeding 8,000 meters, the deepest known fish. These snailfish are small, gelatinous, lacking scales, their bones barely calcified. They're almost transparent, and they move slowly through the water, feeding on tiny invertebrates. They represent perhaps the absolute limit of where vertebrate life can exist. Below about 8,500 meters, no fish have been found, possibly because the pressure exceeds what even specialized proteins and cellular structures can withstand. Amphipods are far more abundant at hadal depths. Some species grow to remarkable size. Hadal amphipods can exceed 6 inches in length, much larger than their shallow water relatives. They're scavengers, feeding on organic matter that sinks down from above, including occasional large food falls like dead whales or fish that sink into the trenches. The trenches themselves are food limited. Very little organic matter reaches the deepest depths. Most is consumed or decomposed long before sinking that far. What does arrive is valuable, and hadal organisms have evolved to make use of it. When bait stations are deployed in trenches, they're quickly swarmed by amphipods and other scavengers, sometimes in enormous numbers, suggesting that populations are larger than the few specimens usually caught in traps would indicate. Temperature in the trenches is just above freezing, typically between 1 and 4 degrees Celsius. The water is well oxygenated, which helps organisms survive the extreme pressure. But the environment is stable. Temperature and chemistry don't fluctuate. This stability allows for specialization. for organisms to evolve biochemistry that works perfectly in a narrow range of conditions. One remarkable aspect of hadal fauna is that many species are found only in a single trench, or even a single section of a trench. Trenches are isolated from each other by shallower seafloor, creating islands of deep water separated by barriers. Organisms that cannot survive at shallower depths cannot migrate between trenches, leading to high endemism with unique species in each trench. Recent explorations have also found disturbing evidence of human impact even at these extreme depths. Microplastics have been found in hadal sediments and in the tissues of hadal amphipods. Pollutants like PCBs, banned decades ago but persistent in the environment, have been detected in high concentrations in deep-sea organisms, sometimes exceeding concentrations in surface waters. Even the remotest parts of the ocean are not isolated from human activity, but the trenches also offer hope. They demonstrate life's resilience, its ability to persist in the most extreme conditions Earth can offer. If life can thrive at the bottom of the Mariana Trench, under crushing pressure in near-freezing water in complete darkness, then life is more robust than we might fear. The ocean's deepest points are not lifeless voids but functioning ecosystems, reduced in biomass perhaps, but complete in their essential elements. And as we've descended through the ocean's layers, from the sunlit surface through the twilight and midnight zones, past the abyss and into the hadal depths, we've seen that each level hosts life, that adaptation to pressure and darkness and cold is possible, that Earth's ocean is alive from its shallowest tide pools to its deepest trenches. But there are more creatures to meet, more remarkable adaptations to explore, before our journey through the deep ocean is complete. The Mariana Trench and other hadal zones are home to creatures found nowhere else on Earth, organisms that have adapted not just to deep water, but to the deepest water, to pressures that would crush most life, to an environment so extreme it represents the absolute boundary of where complex organisms can survive. Among the most successful hadal organisms are amphipods, small crustaceans related to the sandhoppers you might see on beaches. In shallow water, amphipods are typically small, perhaps a centimetre or two long, but in the trenches they grow much larger. Hirondelia gigas, an amphipod found in the Mariana Trench, can reach 7 inches in length, a giant compared to its shallow water cousins. Why this gigantism occurs in deep-sea environments is still debated, but it may relate to slower metabolism, longer lifespans, and reduced predation pressure. These amphipods are scavengers and predators. When food falls to the trench floor, a dead fish or invertebrate, amphipods swarm it, consuming the carcass rapidly. They can detect chemical signals in the water from remarkable distances, homing in on any source of nutrition. In an environment where food is scarce and unpredictable, the ability to quickly locate and exploit any food fall is crucial for survival. Their bodies show adaptations to extreme pressure. The shells are thin but flexible. The tissues contain high concentrations of piezolites, organic molecules that stabilize proteins and membranes under high pressure. These molecules work by counteracting the pressure's effect on protein structure, preventing the proteins from being compressed and denatured. It's a biochemical solution to a physical problem, allowing cellular machinery to function where it normally couldn't. Sea cucumbers also inhabit hadal depths, crawling along the seafloor, processing sediment for any organic matter it contains. They're deposit feeders, essentially earthworms of the deep ocean, turning over the sediment, recycling nutrients. Some hadal sea cucumbers have unusual morphology, with extended bodies and modified tube feet for moving through the soft ooze. And then there are the snailfish, perhaps the most remarkable of hadal vertebrates. The Mariana snailfish, officially described in 2014, has been found at depths exceeding 8,000 metres. It's small, only a few inches long, with a translucent body that appears almost gelatinous. Its skeleton is barely calcified. The bones are thin and flexible, more cartilage than bone. This reduction in skeletal structure helps it cope with pressure, as does the near absence of gas spaces in its body. The snailfish's proteins are particularly interesting. Researchers studying them have found unique amino acid sequences that make the proteins stable under high pressure. The same proteins, if found in a shallow water fish, would likely be unstable, unfolding too easily. But in the high-pressure environment of the trench, they work perfectly. It's another example of how life fine-tunes its biochemistry to match its environment. Below about 8,500 meters, no fish have been found. This may represent a hard limit for vertebrate life, where even the most specialized biochemistry cannot maintain function. The pressure may simply be too great for the types of proteins and cellular structures that vertebrates rely on. Invertebrates, with simpler body plans and different biochemistry, can go deeper. But fish seem to have reached their limit. This creates a boundary, a transition zone where the deepest fish overlap with the hadal invertebrates. It's a frontier not of geography, but of biological possibility, the edge of where one major group of organisms can survive. Studying hadal organisms is technically challenging. They live 7 miles down. Reaching them requires specialized equipment, remotely operated vehicles or manned submersibles capable of withstanding enormous pressure. Collecting specimens without damaging them is difficult. The rapid pressure change as they're brought to the surface often kills them. Keeping them alive in aquariums is nearly impossible. Replicating hadal pressure in a laboratory tank requires sophisticated engineering. As a result, much about hadal life remains unknown. We have specimens, we have video footage, but we lack the detailed behavioral observations that come from extended study. We don't know how hadal organisms reproduce, how long they live, how they interact with each other, what their population dynamics are. Each expedition brings new discoveries, new species, new insights, but also reveals how much we still don't understand. The trenches are also time capsules in a sense. Organisms there have evolved in isolation, cut off from gene flow with populations at shallower depths. They represent independent evolutionary experiments, lineages that have adapted to extreme conditions over millions of years without input from outside. Studying them helps us understand how evolution works at extremes. What solutions are possible when selection pressure is intense and consistent? And there's a philosophical dimension to hadal exploration. The trenches are the most remote, least accessible places on Earth's surface. Fewer people have visited Challenger Deep than have walked on the moon. In reaching these depths, in finding life there, we're pushing against the boundaries of what's reachable, what's knowable. We're exploring not just for practical knowledge, but because these places exist, because they're part of our planet, and because understanding them more fully helps us understand Earth itself. From the deepest trenches, let's return to slightly shallower waters, still deep but within the midnight zone, where some of the ocean's oldest and strangest fish swim through the darkness. Sharks are ancient. They've existed for over 400 million years, predating dinosaurs, surviving multiple mass extinctions. Most sharks we're familiar with, great whites and hammerheads and reef sharks, are modern species, highly evolved predators at the top of marine food webs. But the deep ocean harbours sharks that look far more primitive, species that have changed little over tens of millions of years, sometimes called living fossils. The frilled shark, Chlamydocelicus sanguineus, is perhaps the most primitive-looking shark alive. It lives at depths between 120 and 1,500 metres, usually in the deeper portions of that range. It's long and slender, almost eel-like, reaching lengths of up to 6.5 feet. Its mouth is terminal rather than ventral, positioned at the very front of the snout, and when it opens, it reveals rows of trident-shaped teeth, unlike the triangular teeth of most modern sharks. The gills are also unusual. The shark has 6 gill slits on each side, more than the 5 that most sharks possess, and the first pair extends across the throat, meeting beneath the head, giving the shark a frilled appearance, hence the name. This gill structure is considered primitive, similar to that of very early sharks from the fossil record. The frilled shark feeds on squid, fish, and other sharks. Its teeth are designed to snag soft-bodied prey. The multiple cusps catch and hold slippery animals. The jaw can open extremely wide, and it's thought that the shark strikes with a snake-like motion, lunging forward and engulfing prey whole. Its body is flexible, allowing it to bend and twist in ways that more rigid-bodied sharks cannot. Another deep-sea shark, the goblin shark, Mitsukurina ostoni, looks equally prehistoric. It has a long, flat, blade-like snout extending forward from its head, giving it a profile unlike any other shark. The snout is covered with electroreceptors, organs that detect the electrical fields produced by other animals' muscle contractions. The goblin shark uses this sense to hunt in complete darkness, detecting prey buried in sediment or swimming nearby. But the most unusual feature is the jaw. The goblin shark has highly protrusible jaws that can extend forward from the mouth, almost like a second head telescoping out. When the shark detects prey, the jaws shoot forward, the mouth opening around the prey, teeth grasping it, then the whole jaw apparatus retracts back into the normal position. It's a rapid, almost mechanical action, allowing the shark to strike from farther away than its body position would suggest. Goblin sharks live at depths between 200 and 1200 meters, and they're rarely seen. Most specimens have been caught accidentally in fishing nets or washed ashore after death. We know almost nothing about their behavior in the wild, their reproduction, their lifespan. They remain mysterious, strange pink-skinned ghosts haunting the deep. Both frilled and goblin sharks move slowly, conserving energy in an environment where food is scarce. They don't patrol actively like shallow water sharks. Instead, they drift, waiting for prey to come within range of their senses. When they do strike, it's with surprising speed, a burst of activity followed by a return to near motionlessness. The deep sea hosts other unusual sharks as well. The megamouth shark, discovered only in 1976, is a filter feeder like whale sharks and basking sharks, but it lives much deeper, migrating vertically between shallow waters at night and depths of up to 160 meters during the day. It has a luminescent stripe around its mouth, possibly to attract the small shrimp and plankton it feeds on. Lantern sharks, small sharks rarely exceeding 2 feet in length, have photophores on their undersides that produce light, likely for counter-illumination camouflage. They're among the most common deep-sea sharks, though common in the deep sea is relative. Populations are diffuse, spread across vast areas. What unites these deep-sea sharks is their slow lifestyle. They mature late, reproduce infrequently, grow slowly. A frilled shark might not reach sexual maturity until it's 12 to 20 years old. Litter sizes are small, gestation periods are long. For the frilled shark, pregnancy can last 3.5 years, possibly the longest gestation period of any vertebrate. All of this reflects the low productivity of the deep sea, the scarcity of resources, the need to invest heavily in each offspring to ensure its survival. This life history makes deep-sea sharks vulnerable to overfishing. If populations are reduced, they recover very slowly. A species that doesn't reproduce until 20 years old and then produces only a few offspring cannot bounce back quickly from population decline. Several deep-sea shark species are now considered threatened or near-threatened, victims of bycatch in deep-sea fishing operations. The existence of these primitive-looking sharks in the deep sea raises interesting evolutionary questions. Are they truly primitive, largely unchanged from ancient ancestors? Or do they just look primitive, while their genetics and biochemistry have continued evolving? The answer is probably somewhere in between. They retain some ancestral characteristics, body shapes and jaw structures that work well in the deep and haven't needed to change. But their biochemistry, their sensory systems, their reproduction have all adapted to deep-sea conditions, making them specialized in ways their ancient ancestors were not. Deep-sea sharks remind us that the ocean contains lineages that stretch back hundreds of millions of years, organisms whose basic body plans were established long before humans existed. before mammals existed, before dinosaurs. Swimming through the abyss are creatures that would be familiar, at least in outline, to a time traveller from the Devonian period, the age of fishes, nearly 400 million years ago, and yet they're not relics. They're successful modern organisms perfectly adapted to their current environment, survivors not through luck but through the effectiveness of their designs. The deep ocean hasn't changed much over millions of years, so deep-sea organisms haven't needed to change much either. Stability in environment allows for stability in form. From these ancient predators, we turn to creatures without backbones, without brains in the conventional sense. Organisms that drift through the midnight zone in forms so delicate they seem more like living water than solid animals. Jellyfish exist at all ocean depths, from surface waters to the abyss. But deep-sea jellyfish are particularly otherworldly, their translucent bells and trailing tentacles creating forms that seem almost abstract, shapes that don't look quite biological, more like flowing sculptures of glass illuminated from within. Many deep-sea jellyfish are bioluminescent, producing light through the same chemical reactions as other deep-sea organisms, but displaying it in different patterns. Some have light organs along the bell's edge, creating a glowing outline in the darkness. Others produce flashes or pulses of light when disturbed, possibly to startle predators or attract larger predators to attack whatever is threatening the jellyfish. The Atolla jellyfish, Atolla weevillei, is sometimes called the alarm jellyfish because of its defensive behaviour. When attacked, it produces a spectacular display of bioluminescent flashes that ripple around its bell in a circular pattern, like an emergency siren. This _quote_4_ strategy is thought to attract larger predators to the scene. The jellyfish itself may still be eaten, but its attacker might also be eaten by something bigger, and over evolutionary time this reduces predation pressure. It's a form of defensive collaboration with predators several steps up the food chain. Other deep-sea jellyfish have extremely long tentacles, sometimes trailing dozens of feet below their bells. These tentacles are armed with nematocysts, stinging cells that can capture prey. The jellyfish drift passively, the tentacles spread like fishing lines, waiting for small fish or crustaceans to swim into them. When contact occurs, the nematocysts fire, injecting toxins that paralyze the prey, and the tentacles contract, drawing the captured animal up to the jellyfish's mouth. The deep-sea jellyfish's body is mostly water, sometimes more than 95%. This makes them neutrally buoyant, requiring no energy to maintain depth. They simply exist at whatever depth their density matches the surrounding water's density. Some can regulate their buoyancy slightly by changing the ion composition in their mesoglea, the jelly-like substance between their inner and outer body layers, but most drift passively, carried by currents. One of the largest jellyfish, the lion's mane jellyfish, can occasionally be found at moderate depths, though it's primarily a surface and mid-water species. Its bell can exceed 6 feet in diameter, and its tentacles can extend over 100 feet, making it among the longest animals on Earth. Deep-sea relatives are generally smaller, but they share the same basic body plan: a bell for locomotion and a mass of tentacles for feeding. Jellyfish are among the oldest animal lineages, existing for over 500 million years. They've survived every mass extinction, adapted to every ocean environment. Their simple body plan, lacking complex organ systems, seems to be remarkably resilient. They don't need much: water to maintain their structure, oxygen for respiration, food when available. They can shrink when food is scarce and grow when it's abundant. Some species can even revert to earlier life stages under stress, essentially aging backwards. In the deep sea, jellyfish are important predators, feeding on zooplankton and small fish. They're also food for larger animals. Some sea turtles specialize in eating jellyfish, and certain fish consume them despite their relatively low nutritional value. When jellyfish die, they sink, providing organic matter to the deep sea floor, a contribution to the biological pump that transports carbon from surface waters to the abyss. Some deep-sea jellyfish have extraordinary beauty. The Deepstaria enigmatica has a bell shaped like a large translucent bag, sometimes exceeding 2 feet in diameter. It swims with slow, pulsing contractions, and small crustaceans can often be seen inside the bell, either trapped or possibly living there symbiotically. Watching it move through the water is mesmerizing, this huge, delicate structure rippling and folding like fabric in slow motion. Another stunning species, the Narcomedusae, a small jellyfish with thick, sturdy bells and relatively few tentacles. They're common in the deep sea and extremely diverse. With many species, some produce bright bioluminescence flashing when touched by submersibles. These flashes have been filmed extensively, and they're beautiful, brief explosions of blue or green light in the surrounding darkness. Jellyfish challenge our conception of what an animal is. They have no brain, no centralized nervous system, yet they exhibit behavior. They hunt, they respond to stimuli, they navigate vertically in the water column. Their nervous system is a nerve net distributed throughout the body, allowing for coordinated action without central control. It's a fundamentally different architecture from what vertebrates use, and it works perfectly well for the jellyfish's needs. Do jellyfish experience anything? Do they have any form of subjective awareness? These questions are almost impossible to answer. They have sensory structures, rhopalia, that detect light, gravity, and chemicals. They respond to their environment in complex ways, but whether there's any experience, any there. Any feeling of being a jellyfish we cannot know. Perhaps it's a question without meaning. Our vertebrate consciousness projected onto an organism whose internal reality, if it has one, might be utterly alien to our own. What we can say is that jellyfish are successful, abundant, and important members of deep-sea ecosystems. They're not primitive failures to evolve complexity. They're elegant solutions to the problem of survival. Solutions that have worked for 500 million years and show no signs of becoming obsolete. And as we contemplate these drifting, glowing creatures, we realize we've traveled through much of the deep ocean's diversity, meeting predators and scavengers, filter feeders and symbionts, creatures of heat and creatures of cold, organisms that glow and organisms that hunt by feel. The midnight zone, far from being empty, is rich with life in forms both familiar and strange, but there's still more to explore, more connections to understand, more aspects of this hidden world to consider before we bring our journey to a close. We've met individual creatures, remarkable organisms with fascinating adaptations, but organisms don't exist in isolation. They're parts of ecosystems, networks of interaction where energy flows, nutrient cycle and species depend on each other in complex ways. Understanding the midnight zone requires understanding it not as a collection of strange animals, but as a functioning system. The foundation of all life in the deep sea is the same as life everywhere on Earth: energy. But in the midnight zone, there's no sunlight to capture, no photosynthesis occurring. So where does the energy come from? Ultimately, it comes from the surface. Photosynthesis occurs in sunlit waters, supporting phytoplankton, which are eaten by zooplankton, which are eaten by fish, and so on. Everything in the upper ocean depends on capturing light energy and converting it to biological energy. The deep sea depends on this surface productivity in several ways. First, there's vertical migration. Many organisms, including fish, squid, and crustaceans, spend daytime at depth, but swim to surface waters at night to feed. They consume zooplankton and small fish in the productive surface zone, then return to depth during the day. This daily migration, involving billions of organisms, transports huge amounts of energy from surface to deep waters. It's one of the largest animal migrations on Earth, though it's vertical rather than horizontal. Second, there's marine snow, the constant rain of organic particles settling through the water column. Dead plankton, fecal pellets, fragments of larger organisms all sink slowly downward. Most is consumed or decomposed before reaching great depths, but some makes it all the way to the seafloor. This provides a baseline food supply for filter feeders, deposit feeders, and scavengers throughout the water column. Third, there are food falls, occasional large packages of nutrition like dead whales, large fish, or even logs and other terrestrial debris that sinks from the surface. A dead whale settling on the abyssal plain can support a complex community for years. Scavengers consume the soft tissue, bacteria break down the bones, and the nutrients released support elevated biological productivity around the carcass for decades. Energy in the deep sea is limited compared to surface waters, so deep-sea organisms have evolved to be efficient. Metabolic rates are low, reducing energy requirements. Movement is often slow and deliberate, conserving fuel. Growth rates are slow, but lifespans are long. Many deep-sea organisms are what ecologists call K-selected, adapted for stable environments with limited resources, investing in longevity and few, well-provisioned offspring rather than rapid reproduction, and many offspring. Predation pressure in the midnight zone is different from surface waters. There are fewer predators overall, and encounters between predators and prey are less frequent. But when encounters do occur, they're often decisive. A deep-sea fish cannot afford to miss many meals, so prey capture mechanisms are highly effective. The enormous jaws, the bioluminescent lures, the long tentacles, all are adaptations to maximize the chance of successful predation during infrequent encounters. There's also more reliance on scavenging in the deep sea. Many organisms are opportunistic, feeding on whatever they encounter, whether it's living prey or dead organisms. The distinction between predator and scavenger blurs. A fish might hunt when possible, but readily consume carrion when available. In a food-limited environment, being flexible in food choice is advantageous. Symbiosis is more common in the deep sea than in many surface ecosystems. We've seen it with tube worms and their bacteria, with yeti crabs farming bacteria on their appendages, with anglerfish hosting bioluminescent bacteria in their lures. These partnerships allow organisms to access energy sources they couldn't exploit alone, expanding the range of available niches. The deep-sea ecosystem is also less productive in absolute terms than surface ecosystems. If you measured the total biomass per unit volume, the deep sea would have far less than a tropical reef or a kelp forest. But that doesn't mean it's unimportant. The deep ocean is vast, covering more area than all terrestrial ecosystems combined, even at low density. The total biomass is substantial, and the ecological processes occurring there affect the entire planet. The deep sea is a carbon sink. Organic matter sinking from the surface takes carbon with it, sequestering it in deep water and sediments, where it can remain for centuries or millennia. This biological pump is crucial to Earth's carbon cycle, affecting atmospheric carbon dioxide concentrations and thus global climate. Understanding deep-sea ecology helps us understand how carbon moves through the Earth system. The midnight zone also connects to shallower and surface ecosystems through the vertical migrations of animals. Nutrients and energy move up and down the water column, linking zones that seem separate. An organism that feeds at depth but excretes at the surface is transporting nutrients upward, fertilizing surface waters. Conversely, organisms that feed at the surface but die at depth transport nutrients downward. What emerges is a picture of the ocean not as discrete layers, but as a connected system, with materials and organisms moving vertically and horizontally, with energy flowing from sunlit regions into the darkness, and with the deep influencing the surface in subtle but important ways. The midnight zone isn't isolated from the rest of the ocean, or from the planet's other systems. It's integrated, a part of a larger whole. Understanding it requires understanding these connections, the flows of energy and matter, the migrations and circulations that link surface to abyss. And as we begin to understand the deep ocean as an ecosystem, we also begin to see how much we still don't know, how many connections remain undiscovered, how many species are still unnamed, how many processes are still mysterious. For all we've learned about the deep ocean over the past century and a half, our knowledge remains fragmentary. We've explored more of the moon's surface than the deep ocean floor. We've catalogued only a fraction of deep-sea species, and for the species we know, we often have minimal information about their ecology, behaviour, or life history. Consider that new species are discovered on virtually every deep-sea expedition. Not just new individuals of known species, but genuinely new organisms, sometimes representing new genera or even families. The rate of discovery isn't slowing. If anything, it's accelerating as exploration technology improves and we visit regions never before surveyed. How many species live in the deep ocean? Estimates vary wildly, from hundreds of thousands to millions. We don't know within an order of magnitude. This isn't uncertainty about rare organisms in remote locations. This is fundamental ignorance about the biodiversity of 2/3 of our planet. For many deep-sea organisms, we have only one or a few specimens. We know they exist. We can describe their anatomy, but we cannot say anything about their abundance, distribution, or role in ecosystems. Are they rare specialists or common generalists that we simply haven't sampled adequately? We don't know. We don't understand the full life cycles of most deep-sea organisms. We don't know where they reproduce, how their larvae disperse, how juveniles differ from adults. For many species, we've never seen juveniles at all. We have snapshots, isolated observations, but not complete pictures. We don't understand how deep-sea communities respond to disturbance. When a hydrothermal vent goes extinct, how long does it take for a new vent community to establish? How do larvae find new vents? What determines which species colonize first? These are basic ecological questions, and for most deep-sea environments, we have only guesses for answers. We don't know how climate change is affecting the deep ocean. Surface waters are warming, ocean chemistry is changing as carbon dioxide dissolves, oxygen levels are declining in some regions. How do these changes propagate to depth? Are deep-sea organisms, adapted to stable conditions, more vulnerable to change than surface organisms? Will the vertical migrations that connect surface and deep waters be disrupted? We're beginning to study these questions, but answers are years or decades away. We don't understand the role of deep-sea ecosystems in global nutrient and carbon cycles with precision. We know they're important, but quantifying that importance, understanding the mechanisms in detail, remains challenging. Sampling the deep ocean is expensive and difficult, and processes that occur over large areas and long time periods are hard to measure directly. There are also mysteries that might never be fully solved. Do giant squid or colossal squid hunt actively or ambush prey? What is the maximum size they can reach? How intelligent are deep-sea octopuses? What is the subjective experience, if any, of a jellyfish? Some questions may be beyond our ability to answer, either because the organisms are too difficult to observe, or because the questions themselves are ill-formed, asking for information that doesn't exist in a meaningful way. And then there are the unknown unknowns, the organisms we haven't discovered, the processes we haven't imagined, the connections we haven't suspected. Every major new discovery in deep-sea biology, from hydrothermal vents to giant squid to yeti crabs, has surprised scientists. Each one revealed something we didn't know. The deep ocean likely contains more such surprises, waiting for the right expedition, the right technology, the right moment of observation. This uncertainty isn't a failure of science, it's a reflection of the enormity of the task. The ocean is vast, the deep ocean even more so. Exploring it requires sophisticated equipment, significant funding, trained scientists, and considerable time. Progress is steady but slow. Each expedition adds pieces to the puzzle, but the puzzle is enormous, and we're still assembling the edges. There's something humbling about this. We've split atoms, sequenced genomes, sent spacecraft beyond the solar system, and yet we still don't know how many kinds of fish live in our own ocean. We've walked on the moon, but have visited only a tiny fraction of the deep-sea floor. The ocean keeps its secrets not out of malice, but simply because it's large, deep, and difficult to access. But perhaps there's also something comforting in this unknowing. The deep ocean remains a frontier, a place where discovery is still possible, where major new findings await. In an era where much of Earth has been mapped, catalogued, and explained, the ocean represents genuine mystery, genuine exploration still to be done. And this mystery doesn't diminish what we've learned. We understand the basic principles of deep-sea life, the adaptations necessary for survival at depth, the ways energy flows through ecosystems that receive no sunlight. We've met remarkable organisms and documented extraordinary behaviours. We've begun to piece together the story of life in the abyss. But the story isn't complete. Perhaps it never will be. Perhaps there will always be more to learn, new species to discover, new connections to understand. And that's okay. Science isn't about knowing everything. It's about the process of learning, the journey of discovery, the gradual accumulation of understanding. The deep ocean invites us to continue that journey, to keep exploring, to remain curious. There's so much left to find down there in the darkness, so much left to understand. And every new discovery reminds us that Earth, our home planet, still holds wonders we're only beginning to comprehend. We've spent our journey descending through the ocean's layers, meeting creatures adapted to pressure and darkness and cold. But step back for a moment and consider what these organisms represent. They're life that exists entirely without one of the things we consider most fundamental: sunlight. Every ecosystem we encounter on land depends ultimately on photosynthesis. Plants capture light, convert it to chemical energy, and everything else feeds on plants or on organisms that feed on plants. Light is the beginning of the food chain, the source of all biological energy. Or so we thought. The deep ocean, particularly around hydrothermal vents, demonstrates that life can be based on chemistry alone. Bacteria that extract energy from hydrogen sulfide, organisms that have never seen light and don't need it, entire ecosystems operating on principles completely independent of the sun. This isn't life adapted to the absence of light. It's life that never needed light in the first place. This realization expands our understanding of what life requires. We often list necessities: water, energy, carbon, nutrients. But light isn't on that list, not fundamentally. Energy can come from chemistry, from heat, from reactions between minerals and water. Life is more flexible in its requirements than we assumed. This has implications beyond Earth. When we search for life elsewhere in the universe, we often look for planets in the habitable zone around stars, where surface temperatures allow liquid water. But the deep ocean shows us that habitable zones exist beneath surfaces, in subsurface oceans, around volcanic vents, in places that receive no starlight at all. Europa, one of Jupiter's moons, has an ocean beneath its ice shell. That ocean is dark, no sunlight penetrates. But if Europa has volcanic activity on its seafloor, it might have hydrothermal vents. And if it has vents, it might have life, ecosystems based on chemosynthesis, organisms that have evolved in complete isolation from the sun, parallel to but independent from life on Earth. The deep ocean demonstrates that life can exist in what we might call extreme conditions. But from the organism's perspective, these aren't extreme, they're normal. A tube worm doesn't experience its environment as harsh. It's the only environment the worm knows, the environment it's perfectly suited for. What's extreme depends entirely on perspective. This relativity of extremeness is worth contemplating. We think of the deep ocean as hostile because it would be hostile to us. But to a deep-sea organism, our world would be hostile. Surface pressure would be too low, sunlight too intense, temperatures too warm and variable. We're adapted to our environment, they're adapted to theirs, and neither is objectively better or more normal than the other. Living without light also changes how organisms perceive their world. Vision is our dominant sense, and we structure our understanding of reality around what we see. But in complete darkness, vision is useless, or limited to detecting bioluminescence. Deep-sea organisms rely more on other senses, detecting vibrations, chemical gradients, electrical fields, pressure changes. Their sensory experience of the world is fundamentally different from ours. What would it be like to navigate by chemical sensing, to detect prey by the electrical activity of their muscles, to perceive surroundings through pressure waves rather than light? We can describe these senses mechanistically, we can understand how they work, but we cannot easily imagine the subjective experience, the qualia, of using them as primary senses. This raises questions about consciousness and experience more broadly. If we cannot easily imagine the experience of a deep-sea fish, how much harder is it to imagine the experience of a jellyfish with no brain, of a tube worm that's essentially a house for bacteria, of a bacterium itself? At what point does experience begin? Is there something it's like to be a bacterium, or is experience limited to organisms with more complex nervous systems? These are old philosophical questions, hard problems that neuroscience and philosophy have grappled with for decades. But the deep ocean brings them into sharp relief. Here are organisms so different from us, operating on such different principles, that our usual assumptions about experience and consciousness become tenuous. Perhaps the lesson is humility. We don't know what it's like to be a bat, to use echolocation, as the philosopher Thomas Nagel famously argued. We certainly don't know what it's like to be an anglerfish, if it's like anything at all. Our consciousness, our experience, is one solution to the problem of existing, but it's not the only solution. Other organisms have different solutions, different internal realities, and we must accept that we cannot fully access or understand them. The deep ocean also reminds us that Earth contains worlds within worlds. We talk about the planet as if we know it, as if it's fully explored and understood. But 2/3 of Earth is ocean, and most of that ocean is deep, dark, and largely unexplored. The deep sea is as alien as any extraterrestrial environment we might one day visit, and it's right here, beneath the waves we see from shore. There's something profound about that. We don't need to leave Earth to find alien worlds. We just need to go down, beneath the surface, into the darkness where pressure is crushing, and temperatures are extreme and life takes forms we're only beginning to comprehend. And perhaps that's the most important philosophical implication of deep-sea life. It shows us that our planet is larger, stranger, more diverse than we fully appreciate. Earth isn't just forests and deserts and grasslands. It's also the abyss, the midnight zone, the hadal trenches. It's vent communities and bioluminescent jellies and giant squid swimming through darkness. Life on Earth isn't just what we see when we step outside. It's everything, from the highest mountain peaks to the deepest ocean trenches, from the smallest bacteria to the largest whales. An understanding that totality, holding in mind the full scope of Earth's living systems, gives us a deeper appreciation for the planet we inhabit. One of the most striking features of deep-sea organisms is their resilience. They've adapted to conditions that would kill most surface-dwelling organisms within seconds. Pressure that would crush our bodies, cold that would freeze our blood, darkness that would leave us helpless. These organisms handle effortlessly. This resilience isn't accidental. It's the product of millions of years of natural selection, of countless generations adapting to their environment, of the winnowing process of evolution that removes what doesn't work and preserves what does. Deep-sea life represents survival refined to a high art, organisms that have solved the puzzle of existence under extreme constraints. Consider pressure again. At hadal depths, the pressure is over 1,000 times surface pressure. The force exerted on every square inch of an organism's body is enormous, and yet hadal organisms don't struggle against this pressure. They've evolved biochemistry that functions under these conditions, proteins that remain stable, membranes that stay flexible, cellular processes that continue operating. This biochemical resilience extends to temperature. Some organisms live in water just above freezing, others near hydrothermal vents where temperatures fluctuate wildly. They've evolved enzymes that work across broad temperature ranges, cellular machinery that adapts to thermal stress. Mechanisms to prevent ice crystal formation in sub-zero water. They're resilient to starvation. In an environment where meals are infrequent, the ability to survive weeks or months without food is essential. Deep-sea organisms have low metabolic rates, slowing their energy consumption. They can catabolize their own tissues when necessary, breaking down muscle and fat to fuel essential processes. And when food does arrive, they can consume large amounts at once, storing energy for the inevitable periods of scarcity. They're resilient to isolation. Many deep-sea organisms have extremely low population densities spread across vast areas. Encounters with potential mates are rare. Yet they've evolved strategies to ensure reproduction, pheromone trails that help males find females, bioluminescent displays that signal reproductive readiness, parasitic males in anglerfish that guarantee sperm availability. This resilience also extends to the ecosystem level. Deep-sea communities can recover from disturbances, though recovery may be slow. When a hydrothermal vent dies, the community there perishes, but larvae from other vents eventually colonize new vents, re-establishing the ecosystem. The process might take years or decades, but it happens, demonstrating that these ecosystems, while fragile in some ways, have persistence over longer timescales. But there are limits to resilience. Deep-sea organisms are adapted to stable conditions. Temperature, chemistry, pressure. These have remained relatively constant over millions of years in the deep ocean. This stability has allowed for extreme specialization. But specialization comes with trade-offs. Organisms highly adapted to one set of conditions may be poorly equipped to handle change. Climate change represents a new kind of challenge for the deep ocean. Surface waters are warming, but the deep ocean warms more slowly, buffered by its enormous volume and thermal inertia. However, changes in surface temperature affect ocean circulation, which affects nutrient transport, which affects food availability in the deep. Changes in ocean chemistry. Particularly acidification from absorbed carbon dioxide might affect organisms with calcium carbonate structures, though at depth, where pressure is high, the effects are complex and not fully understood. Oxygen levels are also changing. Some regions of the ocean are becoming more hypoxic, with lower dissolved oxygen concentrations. This is partly due to warming. Warm water holds less dissolved gas, and partly due to changes in ocean circulation. The oxygen minimum zones might expand, shrinking the habitat available for organisms that cannot tolerate very low oxygen. Conversely, some organisms adapted to low oxygen might find more suitable habitat. Deep-sea fishing also poses a threat. Bottom trawling, dragging nets across the seafloor, destroys habitat and catches organisms indiscriminately. Deep-sea fish populations cannot sustain high exploitation rates. Their slow growth and late maturation mean that populations, once depleted, take decades or centuries to recover. Several deep-sea fish species have already been overfished to dangerously low levels. Mining for minerals on the deep-sea floor is another emerging threat. The ocean floor contains deposits of valuable metals, and there's increasing interest in extracting them. But mining would destroy habitat, create sediment plumes that spread over large areas, and disrupt ecosystems we barely understand. The long-term consequences are unknown, but likely negative for deep-sea communities. Despite these threats, the deep ocean's resilience gives some reason for hope. If we act to protect it, if we limit exploitation, reduce carbon emissions, prevent destructive activities, the deep ocean can persist. Its organisms have survived for millions of years. They're not inherently fragile. But they're vulnerable to rapid change, to human impacts that occur faster than the evolution can respond to. The resilience of deep-sea life is a reminder of nature's adaptability, but it's not infinite. Organisms can adapt to gradual changes over generations, but not to catastrophic disruptions or rapid environmental shifts. Protecting the deep ocean requires recognizing both its strength, the incredible endurance of organisms there, and its vulnerabilities, the limits beyond which even adapted organisms cannot survive. And this brings us to questions of value and stewardship. The deep ocean doesn't directly support most human activities. We don't farm it. We don't live there. We rarely visit. But it's part of Earth's ecosystem, connected to the parts we do interact with. The biological pump that transports carbon to depth affects atmospheric carbon dioxide. The organisms there contribute to global biodiversity. The ecosystems there process nutrients that eventually circulate back to surface waters. We're connected to the deep ocean even if we never see it. What happens there affects us, and what we do affects it. Understanding that connection, acting as stewards of the entire ocean, not just the parts we use directly, is part of being responsible inhabitants of this planet. We've called these creatures strange, unusual, weird. And by our standards, by the standards of organisms adapted to sunlight and air, they are. But there's another way to look at strangeness, as an invitation to expand our sense of what's beautiful, what's normal, what's worthy of appreciation. An anglerfish with its enormous mouth and bioluminescent lure isn't ugly, it's elegantly adapted. Those features serve functions, solve problems, enable survival. In the context of the Midnight Zone, the anglerfish is perfectly designed, a masterpiece of evolutionary engineering. That we find it strange says more about us than about the fish. Beauty in biology isn't about aesthetics in the human sense. It's about fit, about the match between form and function, about solutions that work. A barrel-leaf fish with its transparent head and tubular eyes is beautiful because its design solves the problem of seeing in the twilight zone. A gulper eel's enormous mouth is beautiful because it maximizes the chance of capturing scarce prey. When we look at deep-sea creatures and see ugliness or weirdness, we're judging them by inappropriate standards. We're expecting them to conform to our familiar templates, to look like the organisms we encounter in our own environment. But why should they? They don't live where we live. They don't face the challenges we face. They haven't evolved under the same selection pressures. Instead, we might try to see them on their own terms, as solutions to the specific problems of deep-sea life. The viperfish's teeth aren't frightening, they're efficient. The vampire squid's webbing isn't sinister, it's a defensive display. The giant tube worm's lack of a mouth isn't a deformity, it's unnecessary given its symbiotic relationship with bacteria. This shift in perspective from judgment to appreciation allows us to find beauty in forms that initially seem alien. The jellyfish drifting through darkness with its trailing tentacles and glowing bell, that's beautiful in its simplicity, its efficiency, its grace. The yeti crab waving its furry claws through vent water, that's beautiful in its strange farming behaviour, its adaptation to an extreme niche. There's also beauty in the sheer diversity of solutions life has found. The variety of bioluminescent displays, the different feeding strategies, the various ways of coping with pressure and darkness and cold, all demonstrate the creative power of evolution, the endless variation it can produce when given enough time and different environments to work in. We often talk about tropical rainforests or coral reefs as biodiversity hotspots, and they are. But the deep ocean, in its own way, rivals them. The number of species, the variety of forms, the range of adaptations, these are comparable to any terrestrial ecosystem. We just see them less often because they're harder to access. Beauty is also found in the connections, the ecological relationships that bind organisms into communities. The partnership between tube worms and bacteria, the predator-prey dynamics between anglerfish and their prey, the symbiosis between yeti crabs and the bacteria they farm, all represent intricate relationships refined over evolutionary time. There's beauty too in the mystery that remains, in the unknown. The deep ocean is one of the last frontiers on Earth, a place where major discoveries still await. Each expedition might find something completely new, something that redefines our understanding of what's possible. That potential for discovery, for surprise, for the expansion of knowledge is itself beautiful. And perhaps there's beauty in the resilience, in the sheer determination of life to exist everywhere it can, to fill every available niche, to adapt to every environment. Life in the deep ocean isn't struggling or barely surviving, it's thriving within its means, doing what life does everywhere, reproducing, competing, adapting, persisting. When we shift from seeing strangeness as negative to seeing it as interesting, as worthy of curiosity and respect, our relationship to these organisms changes. They're not monsters from the deep or freaks of nature, they're fellow inhabitants of Earth, distant cousins in the tree of life, organisms that share a planet with us even if we occupy very different parts of it. This perspective, this appreciation for diversity and adaptation in all its forms, might serve us well beyond biology. In a world where difference often breeds suspicion or fear, recognizing that strangeness can be beautiful, that unfamiliarity can be valuable, that what's different from us isn't threatening but enriching, these are lessons worth learning. The deep ocean teaches us to expand our definitions, to broaden our sense of what's normal and acceptable and worthy of protection. It shows us that Earth is stranger and more wonderful than we might have imagined, that life is more versatile and creative than our limited experience would suggest. And in that strangeness, in that vast underwater realm of darkness and pressure and bioluminescent light, there's profound beauty. Not despite the strangeness, but because of it. The deep ocean is beautiful precisely because it's so different from what we know, because it challenges our assumptions, because it exists at all. We've spent hours descending through the ocean, meeting creatures that live in darkness. But we haven't talked much about the darkness itself, about what it means to live where light never reaches, about the profound quiet of the midnight zone. Darkness, from our perspective, is often associated with fear, with danger, with the unknown. We're diurnal animals, active during the day, vulnerable at night. Our mythology and stories reflect this. Darkness is where threats hide, where danger lurks. We've invented countless ways to banish darkness, to extend daylight through technology. But in the deep ocean, darkness isn't an aberration or a threat. It's the normal state, the constant condition. For organisms there, darkness is home. It's the environment they've adapted to, the context within which they evolved. And there's something almost comforting in that permanence, in the absence of change. Surface environments are variable. Day alternates with night, seasons cycle, weather changes. Organisms there must cope with fluctuation, must adapt to changing conditions. But in the midnight zone, conditions are stable. It's always dark, always cold, always high pressure. This constancy allows for specialization, for organisms to fine-tune themselves to a narrow range of conditions. There's a kind of peace in that stability. No sudden changes, no disruptions, just the slow, steady existence in an environment that doesn't fluctuate. Time passes differently in the deep. Without days or seasons, without the rhythms that govern surface life, the deep ocean operates on its own timescale, slower, more gradual. The darkness also creates a kind of intimacy. In the midnight zone, vision is limited to short distances, to the range of bioluminescent light. Beyond that, there's nothing but darkness. This creates a small, enclosed world around each organism, a sphere of awareness limited by what it can sense. It's almost like existing in a small bubble, a private space surrounded by infinite unknown. This might seem claustrophobic from our perspective, but perhaps for deep-sea organisms it's normal, even comforting. The darkness provides privacy, separation, a buffer between individuals. Encounters are events, not constants. The rest of the time, each organism is alone with itself, drifting through darkness, existing in solitude. There's a meditative quality to this existence. No distractions, no constant stimulation, just the simple, repetitive tasks of survival, searching for food, avoiding predators, maintaining position in the water column. Life stripped down to essentials, without the complexity and noise that characterize surface environments. Human meditation practices often emphasize simplifying, removing distractions, focusing on fundamentals. In a sense, deep-sea life is always meditative, always focused, always present in the immediate moment. There's no future to anticipate beyond the next meal, no past to dwell on, just the continuous now of existing in darkness. The silence, too, contributes to this quality. Sound travels well in water, but the deep ocean is quiet. There are no waves crashing, no wind, no rain, just occasional sounds, the clicks and calls of marine mammals passing through, the movement of water, the rare contact between organisms. Most of the time, silence. This silence is different from the silence we might experience on land. It's deeper, more complete. It's the silence of a place where not much happens, where activity is sparse, where the pace of life is slow. It's not an empty silence, not the silence of a vacuum, but a full silence, the sound of water pressing in from all sides, of existing at depth. And within this darkness and silence, life continues, not frantically, not desperately, but steadily, persistently. Organisms drift, hunt, feed, reproduce, die. The basic cycles of life continue in the absence of light, proof that life doesn't need bright or busy or complex environments. It can exist in simplicity, in quiet, in darkness. There's something almost reassuring about that. Life is robust, adaptable, capable of existing in conditions we might think impossible. The deep ocean shows us that life isn't fragile, isn't limited to narrow conditions. It's versatile, persistent, capable of finding ways to survive and even thrive in the most unlikely places. And perhaps, for those of us who sometimes feel overwhelmed by the noise and light and complexity of modern human life, there's a strange comfort in knowing that the deep ocean exists, that somewhere on Earth there are places of profound darkness and quiet, where life continues at a slower pace, where the fundamental processes of existence unfold without hurry or complication. We can't live there ourselves, of course. Our bodies aren't built for it. But knowing it exists, understanding it as a real place with real organisms living real lives, somehow makes the world feel more balanced, more complete. The deep ocean is a counterpoint to the brightness and noise of surface life, a reminder that there are many ways to exist, many environments that support life, many rhythms besides the ones we're most familiar with. And as we approach the end of our journey through the deep ocean, this understanding of darkness not as something to fear, but as something that simply is, that provides stability and consistency, helps us appreciate the deep ocean not despite its darkness, but because of it. The darkness is essential, is defining, is what makes the deep ocean what it is. We've travelled together through the ocean's layers, from sunlit surface to hadal trenches, meeting remarkable organisms and learning about their adaptations. We've seen that the deep ocean is not empty or lifeless, but rich with organisms and ecosystems, strange but functional, alien but part of our planet. And yet, as we've noted throughout this journey, much remains unknown. The deep ocean is perhaps Earth's last great frontier, the least explored region of our planet, the place where major discoveries still await. Understanding what we've learned helps us appreciate how much more there is to learn. Exploration of the deep ocean is accelerating. Technology that was experimental decades ago is now routine. Remotely operated vehicles can stay underwater for hours, filming and collecting samples at depths humans cannot reach. Autonomous underwater vehicles can map the seafloor and survey large areas without human operators. Submersibles can carry scientists to the deepest trenches and return them safely. These tools are revealing the deep ocean in unprecedented detail. High-definition video captures behaviours that were previously only guessed at. Environmental DNA sampling detects organisms without needing to capture them. Sensor networks can monitor conditions continuously, tracking changes over time. The rate of discovery is accelerating, each expedition finding new species, new ecosystems, new phenomena. But exploration isn't just about cataloguing what exists. It's about understanding how systems work, how energy flows, how organisms interact, how ecosystems respond to change. It's about connecting observations to theory, building models that explain what we see and predict what we might find. The future of deep-sea exploration will likely involve more sophisticated sensors, better cameras, longer duration missions. We'll develop technologies to keep organisms alive as they're brought to the surface, allowing for better study. We'll create virtual environments where deep-sea organisms can be studied without removing them from their habitat, using cameras and sensors to observe them remotely. We'll also connect deep-sea exploration to other fields. Climate scientists need to understand the deep ocean's role in carbon cycling and heat storage. Astrobiologists look to deep-sea ecosystems as analogues for possible life on other worlds. Biochemists study deep-sea organisms for novel enzymes and compounds with potential applications. The deep ocean isn't just interesting in itself, it's relevant to many other areas of knowledge. There's also growing recognition that the deep ocean needs protection. It's not an infinite resource, not immune to human impact. The organisms there are vulnerable, their populations fragile, their ecosystems slow to recover from disturbance. Several international efforts are underway to establish marine protected areas in the deep ocean, to regulate fishing and mining, to ensure that commercial activities don't destroy what we're only beginning to understand. But protection requires knowledge. We can't protect what we don't understand, can't manage what we haven't studied. This creates urgency for exploration, for learning as much as we can about deep-sea ecosystems before human activities expand into them more extensively. The deep ocean also holds keys to understanding Earth's past. Sediment cores from the ocean floor contain records of past climates, ocean chemistry, and biological productivity stretching back millions of years. These records help us understand how Earth's systems have changed over time, how they've responded to past warming or cooling events, what the long-term trends are. Looking forward, the deep ocean will likely become more accessible. Not just to scientists, but to the public. Virtual exploration, where people can experience deep-sea environments through high-quality video and interactive technologies, will make the deep ocean less remote, less abstract. Education programs will use deep-sea footage to teach about adaptation, ecosystems, and biodiversity. The strange creatures we've met in this journey will become more familiar, recognized and appreciated rather than feared or dismissed. There's also potential for sustainable use of deep-sea resources. Some deep-sea organisms produce unique compounds with pharmaceutical applications. Deep-sea enzymes, adapted to function under extreme conditions, have industrial uses. Carefully managed fishing can provide food without depleting populations. The challenge is balancing use with conservation, ensuring that we take only what can be sustained while protecting the ecosystems themselves. What's certain is that the deep ocean will remain a focus of scientific attention for decades to come. Every question we answer raises new questions. Every new species we discover hints at others still unknown. Every ecosystem we study reveals connections we hadn't suspected. The process of exploration and understanding is ongoing, cumulative, building toward a more complete picture of Earth's largest environment. And perhaps that's the most important point about the deep ocean as Earth's last frontier. It reminds us that exploration isn't finished, that discovery is still possible, that our planet still holds mysteries. In an age when much of Earth has been mapped and catalogued, when satellites can image the entire surface and databases contain information on millions of species, it's easy to think we know our planet completely. But the deep ocean proves otherwise. 2/3 of Earth remains largely unexplored, inhabited by organisms we've never seen, containing ecosystems we're only beginning to understand. We don't know our planet as thoroughly as we sometimes believe. There's still work to do, still knowledge to gain, still frontiers to explore. And that's not a failure or a gap to be filled as quickly as possible. It's an opportunity, a gift. The deep ocean gives us something to explore, something to discover, something to wonder about. It keeps our planet interesting, mysterious, worthy of continued study and respect. As we conclude our journey through the deep ocean, as we prepare to surface and return to our world of air and light, this sense of ongoing mystery, of future discoveries waiting to be made, provides a fitting ending. We've learned much, but there's always more to learn. We've seen remarkable things, but there are more remarkable things still hidden in the darkness. The deep ocean will be there, waiting when we're ready to return. The organisms there will continue their lives, adapted and thriving in their eternal darkness. The ecosystems will function, energy will flow, life will persist. And whenever we choose to descend again, to explore further, to learn more, the deep ocean will reveal a bit more of itself, sharing its secrets slowly, generously, with those patient and curious enough to seek them. We've travelled together for quite some time now, nearly 2.5 hours, descending from the ocean's sunlit surface down through layers of increasing darkness and pressure, meeting creatures whose very existence challenges our understanding of what life can be. Thank you for staying with me for this entire journey, for your patience as we move slowly through the midnight zone, for your curiosity about organisms that live in places we can rarely visit. From the twilight zone, where faint light still penetrates, we descended into complete darkness, into the midnight zone where bioluminescence provides the only light, past the abyssal plains to the deepest trenches where pressure exceeds 1,000 atmospheres. We met anglerfish with their glowing lures, giant squid that haunted sailors' nightmares, gulper eels with impossibly large mouths, and vampire squid that, despite their name, are gentle scavengers. We explored hydrothermal vents where life is based on chemistry rather than sunlight, where tube worms and yeti crabs thrive in superheated water rich with minerals. We learned about the barrelly fish with its transparent dome and rotating eyes, about deep-sea jellyfish drifting through darkness, about ancient sharks that have barely changed over millions of years. We've contemplated the philosophical implications of life without light, the resilience of organisms adapted to extreme conditions, the beauty in strangeness, and the comfort that can be found in eternal darkness. And we've recognised that the deep ocean remains Earth's last great frontier, largely unexplored, full of organisms we haven't yet discovered, and secrets we've only begun to uncover. The answer to the question we might have started with, whether life can exist in the deepest, darkest parts of the ocean, is a definitive yes. Life not only exists there but thrives, in forms diverse and extraordinary, adapted perfectly to conditions that would kill most surface organisms within moments. The deep ocean isn't barren or lifeless. It's a living, functioning ecosystem, different from surface environments, but no less complete, no less successful. Perhaps what we've learned suggests something deeper, that life is more versatile and persistent than we sometimes realise, that it can adapt to almost any conditions Earth provides, that our planet is stranger and more wonderful than our daily experience reveals. The deep ocean expands our sense of what's possible, what's normal, what deserves our protection and respect. If you enjoyed this slow drift through the ocean's depths, if these explorations of science and life help you find peace at the end of your day, a like and subscribe would help others discover these calm journeys. And to those who've been here before, who've accompanied me on previous descents into knowledge and wonder, thank you. Your presence makes this work meaningful. Wherever you are in the world right now, whatever time zone you're listening from, I hope you're comfortable. I hope your breathing has slowed, becoming deeper and more regular. I hope your thoughts have quieted, the day's concerns fading like sunlight fading as you descend through ocean layers. I hope your body feels heavy and warm, relaxed, ready for sleep. If you can, look up at the night sky, at the stars scattered across darkness. Or if you're inside, imagine them. Each point of light is a sun, many with planets, some possibly with oceans of their own. And perhaps somewhere out there, in an ocean beneath the ice of a distant moon, organisms are living in eternal darkness, adapted to their world as deep-sea creatures are adapted to ours. Perhaps the universe is full of such places, full of a life finding ways to exist in conditions we might never imagine. But here on Earth, beneath our familiar seas, life has already found those ways. The deep ocean exists, with its strange and beautiful inhabitants, its ecosystems based on chemistry and darkness, its organisms that have never seen light and never needed to. It's not a theoretical possibility, but a present reality, proof that life is endlessly creative, endlessly adaptable. And there's something peaceful in that knowledge, something comforting in understanding that our planet, even in its most extreme environments, supports life. The deep ocean isn't empty, it's full in its own way, full of organisms doing what all organisms do, surviving, adapting, persisting through time. As you drift towards sleep, let that image rest in your mind if you wish. The deep ocean, dark and quiet and cold, teeming with life that has found ways to thrive where survival seemed impossible. Anglerfish drifting with glowing lures, jellyfish pulsing through darkness, tube worms clustered around vents, giant squid swimming through midnight waters. All of them alive, all of them adapted, all of them at home in the deep. Not struggling, not suffering, just being, just existing in the way their bodies and behaviours allow. There's no urgency there, no rush, just the slow, steady continuation of life in an environment that hasn't changed much in millions of years. Let that stillness, that deep quiet of the ocean floor settle over you now. Let the darkness of the midnight zone match the darkness behind your closed eyelids. Let the pressure of water pressing in from all sides equalize and balance until you feel weightless, suspended, floating in warm darkness. The deep ocean will be there tomorrow, the next day, years from now. Its creatures will continue their lives, their slow drifts through darkness, their patient waiting for the next meal, their reproduction and death and birth in cycles that span decades or centuries. The ocean keeps its own time, unhurried, unconcerned with the frantic pace of surface life. And tonight, you can borrow some of that calm, that deep-sea peace as you transition into sleep. There's nowhere you need to be, nothing you need to do. Just like a deep-sea organism drifting in the current, you can let go, release control, allow the natural rhythms of sleep to take over. Sleep well. Dream of deep waters if you dream at all, of bioluminescent lights flickering in darkness, of creatures perfectly adapted to their world, of the quiet, eternal depths where life continues in ways both strange and beautiful. Good night.